message is being broadcast by the Department of Defense of the Republic. At 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, multiple unidentified objects were confirmed to have entered Earth's atmosphere.
Discovery Houston, 20 seconds to LOS T-drift.
The first message that comes to you is you are a divine being. You matter. You count. You come from realms of unimaginable power and light, and you will return to those realms.
The vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Broadcasting from Forest Tower Studios, all the way from the Deep South. Now, here is your host, Joe Root.
Good evening. It is Friday, August the 10th, and this is Lighting the Void. I'm your host, Joe Roop, and we are live on The Fringe FM. It is a kind of a different, we're doing a makeup show tonight on Friday night because we didn't get to do it Tuesday night. It's a good thing we had this night open. So, yeah, I'm glad we're going to do that. But it's still Friday night, so that means you're with Lighting the Void if you're listening in. So you still got to fire up your chakras, sync both hemispheres of your brain together, and shoot your magical beam of light through your third eye tonight with us on our search for truth into the void. It's going to be a cool show. We're going to talk about astrotheology and the star myths with David Mathisen. The call-in number is 1-800-588-0335. As we approach the new moon tonight, I can't think of a better subject to talk about. And you know that we've hinted about these things in the show. I've talked about them a little bit, but I don't think anybody knows astrotheology as much as David does. I'm sure they do, but I don't. So we're going to have a good, interesting conversation. Very informative conversation. And then next week, we're going to kick it off again. We're going to have some of the guests we're going to have on next week is Suzanne Ross, Dr. Dean Radin, a couple of new people that I'm going to introduce you to. Oh, yeah, by the way, the call to listen line, if something happens to your internet over at TalkStream Live, that number 701-719-3971. Got to give the TalkStream Live people a shout out. And that was a fun show we had last night with Mary Ducino. We had some new callers. All of the stuff has been sent out in the mail, so most of you should be getting, if you hadn't got it by, I would say Tuesday of next week. I don't know how long it takes stuff to get to Canada, though. I don't have a clue. But I know it's all out. So we've only got one book of that left to give away for any new caller that calls in. And that book actually is Wayne McCrory Jr.'s book, The Alchemical Tech Revolution, where he signed it and inscribed it. So thank you to all who have donated to the show and have supported us all the way, whether it's a $5 donation, 20, 50, 100, all the stuff that you guys have done is just been amazing. You've gotten this show to where it is, and so I really appreciate it. I can't thank you enough. I really don't know what I'd do without you guys. I guess I would just keep trying to do this, but I'd probably have to cut the show down a few days. But yeah, so tonight we're going to be talking with David Mathisen. We're going to talk about astrotheology. Now, that word in itself sounds kind of complicated, but I promise you, before the night's up, you're going to understand why I wanted to talk about this. And it's David's been on a couple of other shows too, so it's I hope I don't make anybody mad when I say this, but you know, I was looking at the reviews online of this show, because you know it goes out to all the podcast reviews, and someone actually, we got pretty good reviews. We actually went up in the charts, and someone said that Joe Roop does a show that's anti-Christian. That's funny. You know, I've got a picture of Jesus knocking on the door because, you know, that's one of my favorite verses. I'm far from anti-Christian. Now, I may not have your view of Christianity, but I'm far from anti-Christian. Just letting you know. So I'm sure David's going to talk about some of that tonight, too. Everything on social media is Lighting the Void. You can just Google it, Lighting the Void, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Grab a T-shirt, click on the Amazon portal, shop at Amazon to help support us. Get your free Audible book at audibletrial.com/LTV radio. and just share and like and subscribe and talk about us. And if you're going to hashtag it, hashtag LTV Radio. And real quick, I want to let you guys know I'll be watching the meteor shower this weekend. So if you guys are watching it with me, be in the Discord chat, hit me up. I don't know what like the best time is. They say it's the best shower of this year. Now during the Perseus peak this weekend, they're saying you should see I guess you're going to see about 60 or 70 meteors per hour. But in, I think 2016, there was like 150 to 200 per hour. So it's not as good as the one that year. Still going to be pretty good. But they're saying the peak will be visible both nights of the 11th and the 12th. Some are saying the 12th and the 13th. I don't really know. I haven't been able to nail this down online yet. But if you've got better information, let me know, because it's one of my favorite things to do is watch the meteor showers out there. Well, I'm going to Facebook ding. I can't never get it to go away. But ding, never can get it to go away. Let's start this thing. You want to? Let's get David in here. I'm ready to start talking about this stuff. All right, now David Mathisen is with us. David Warner Mathisen is the author of 7 books and a leading expert on ancient myths and connecting them with the stars. He has appeared on several popular podcasts such as the Higher Side Chats, Grimerica, and more. Tonight we'll be discussing what the star myths are and what the implications of the constellations and the myths that have been with us since the beginning of time. You can visit the website at starmythworld.com. David, thank you so much for coming on the show. This rescheduled show, by the way. I really appreciate it, man.
Hey, thanks, Joe, and it's great to be here, and hello to everyone out in the Lighting the Void world out there. I'm really excited to be on a show that's not just going out in the digital format of ones and zeros, but is actually going out in actual waves over the electromagnetic spectrum.
Well, you got an interesting take on this stuff, man, because the only other person that I know that knows a little bit about astrotheology was Jordan Maxwell, right? But I've listened to a lot of your during the week. I've listened to a lot of your interviews, and you go deep into this stuff. It ain't just about the stories. You believe a little bit different than everybody else does when it comes to this stuff, don't you?
Well, that's an interesting question. So, I think that this knowledge that I'm talking about has been known for centuries. It's been written about for centuries. I believe that the ancients left little hints. And what I'm talking about is that the myths, the mythology that's given to every single culture on our planet, all the way around the globe, are speaking a celestial language. And we can get into what I'm talking about that. But there are hints that Aristotle knew this. There are hints that Plato knew this. There was an ancient philosopher who was after Plato and Aristotle who was named Plutarch. He talks in ways that make it sound as if he knew this. And there's other ancient philosophers. Origen, we might get a chance to talk about him. Origen is Origen. And then later on, there was a philosopher named Macrobius a few centuries later. So this goes really far back. But even in the 1800s, there was a preacher in England who started off to believe the scriptures in a literal sense, and then later on realized that they're all based on celestial metaphor. His name was Robert Taylor, and he lived from 1758 to 1835, and he actually lectured extensively on this subject, and those lectures were published after his death in 1857. So this has been written about, and his explanations of the biblical stories and connecting them to the stars is very detailed and very deep. But even Robert Taylor, I have some differences with the conclusions that he came to. But just speaking on the level of the stories themselves, the evidence is overwhelming that they are connected to the stars. And a lot of people, when they reference this term astrotheology, are really applying it to the Bible. But one thing that I've found is that it goes around the world. This applies to the myths of ancient India, ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient China and Japan, the myths that are found in Europe, other parts of Europe, like Northern Europe, the Norse myths. Across the ocean in the Americas, you can find the same system being used. Even across the Pacific Ocean, the cultures of the Pacific, the Polynesian cultures, their stories of Maui, Australian myths from the ancient indigenous people of Australia, some of the oldest cultures that, conventional historians admit that these are very old cultures and stories being passed down in Australia, in Africa, and other parts of Asia besides China and Japan. So it's worldwide, and I can talk about how I came to this conclusion because I didn't always think this way, but and I can talk to some of the differences with other researchers, but really I'm just looking at the myths themselves, not trying to say, oh, I'm different from this person or that person.
But what I mean is what I heard you say, and I need to really, I guess, tell you what I mean by that when I said that. What I mean is there's something there, I think, that these myths are trying to teach us. It's deep in just about every mystery school or esoteric teachings, and like I heard you say something about it was kind of like the inner guideways to the invisible realms, and this was a statement you made on the Higher Side Chats, which I thought was profound, because the whole as above, so below thing, right? The whole Hermetic axiom of that, and it's like it is in everything, and I just see that number 12 all over the place too. It's in just about everything, you know what I'm talking about, how it refers to the Bible, and I'm not real sure what it's there for. Like, take, for instance, this verse in the Bible that baffles me to this day. It's like, when you come into the upper room, when you see the man with a pitcher of water, now this is a Bible verse, but when you see the man holding the pitcher of water, come into the upper room and I'll meet you there. Well, I mean, if you take that literally, then Jesus is talking about some guy walking down the road with a pitcher of water. But you and I might both think that, that's the sign of Aquarius. So what is he talking about? Like in the age of Aquarius? Or is he talking about some type of period or time that we're going to be at a certain consciousness? Because he can't just be talking about some guy walking down the street holding a pitcher of water. You see what I mean? I mean, what's important about that?
Right. So that's a good intro. So also in that verse, this is talking about Jesus preparing for the Last Supper, and also in that verse, he tells them, "You're going to find the animal that I'm going to ride into town on." Not that particular verse, but in that same passage, and it's going to be a donkey and the foal of a donkey, or a she ass and the colt of a she ass. Now, you might ask yourself, how is someone going to ride into the city of Jerusalem on two different animals at the same time? And there are some passages in the Bible that are very hard to take literally. Now, I want to step back a little bit, because there may be listeners who say, wait a minute, of course it's supposed to be taken literally. Anyone who's not taking it literally is trying to tell me, okay, then this guy doesn't think that the Bible is true.
Right.
And
that's how I get accused of being anti-Christian. So I appreciate you stepping back on that. Thanks.
Yeah. So actually, I would argue that the Bible is true. It is teaching profound truths, but it does not necessarily mean that it is going to teach those in a literal and terrestrial. It's not talking about literal and terrestrial history. And there are some verses that I can go to show that it really doesn't work as terrestrial history that I'll get to in a moment. We'll come back to that. But so you're right. The man with a pitcher of water is pretty clearly talking about the constellation Aquarius. But I just want to step back and say this actually connects the Bible with mythology from around the world, because the Greek myths can also be shown. All the gods and goddesses and heroes in the Greek myths are using this same system. There are gods in the Greek myths that relate to the constellation of Aquarius, and I can talk to that. I've got a whole book that's all about just the Greek myths relating to the stars. The gods of ancient Egypt are related to specific constellations. So when I say that all these stories, all these ancient myths, all these sacred stories, whether they're from the Native American sacred stories or the Australian people of Australia, the Aboriginal indigenous people of Australia or Africa, or the Norse myths, all those gods and goddesses and adventures, all the characters and all the episodes are based on specific constellations. But that does not mean, I would argue, I think it might be better up front to kind of explain the specific evidence, and then towards the back we can start talking about what if all the myths around the world are using celestial references, what could it mean? And that has to do with my interpretation. It's probably better to start off with the actual evidence, the specific evidence, and different people can interpret that differently. Some people, when they see astrotheology and they say, oh, look, there's some things in the Bible that seem to be related to the solstices and the equinoxes. Well, that means that they're just talking about, oh, yeah, back in the ancient times, they needed to know when to plant their crops and when was the harvest.
Yeah,
and
you
so,
do hear that a lot.
And it's much deeper than that. That's what I would call maybe shallow astrotheology, trying to say, oh, yeah, because of that, it shows that those people who made these things were really primitive, or they were using primitive technology. They couldn't figure out the calendar. They didn't have an iPhone to tell them, when to plant their crops. So they had to have something, so that it was for that. This is obviously something much deeper than that, I would argue. But first, it's probably better, rather than diving into the profound spiritual meaning that they were conveying, to get into the specific mechanics of how they were doing it. But I did want to say up front, this does not mean that I don't believe that the Bible is true. I do believe that the Bible and all the other myths are telling us profound truths that really have to do with our lives and this world that we find ourselves in that has a spiritual component to it. And they're explaining these truths about things that we can't necessarily see, about the invisible world, and they're using the stars as a code or a language in order to teach it to us, to teach us something about invisible truths using visible signs in the infinite heavens. So I'll explain a little bit about how they do that. But does that kind of set up or answer
absolutely,
a little bit of
sure.
what you're saying?
Yeah, we got a pretty intelligent audience here, so we can follow along pretty well with what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to take away from anybody. So I will say that right up front, I used to believe the scriptures were intended to be understood literally. I was an extremely diligent student of the scriptures, to the point that when I was going through grad school, I did not do any studying on Sunday of my, materials for grad school. I would only read either the Bible or commentaries on the Bible. And I was going to church once or twice a week, and I was taking everything in the Bible very literally. In fact, I was not looking for this information, but I was always, go ahead.
Can I just say something too real quick about, maybe not from a scholarly point of view, but the night sky probably is the most spiritual thing as far as in my life. There's a lot of things that really make me feel I'm stuck in a material world, or make me think about my problems. But a lot of people like to look at sunsets and stuff. For me, when I see the night sky and look at the constellations, that's probably the most spiritual thing that I feel. Like I've always felt there's something there. There's something more to it that we just don't know. Yeah,
no, I agree with you. And I think that when it's not just what I think, this is when you're looking into the night sky, this is true. You are looking into infinity. You're looking out into a realm that is infinite. And so whoever gave these profound stories or myths or sacred scriptures to humanity used the biggest and most awe-inspiring canvas to paint upon that it is possible to use. If you think about Moby Dick, the great American author Herman Melville was trying to wrestle with some really deep and really profound issues when he wrote Moby Dick. He was dealing with predestination and free will and all these things, and he looked for the biggest, deepest canvas that he could paint upon, and he used the mighty, oceans and these enormous whales, and he was wrestling with these huge issues. And it's profound. And actually, if you read it, it's not really about whaling at all, even though he spends pages and pages talking about, well, this is how we'd wrap up the rope inside the whaleboat. At the end, he would always turn the corner and say, I'm not really talking about a whale line here. I'm talking about, fate in the boat. It can always pull you into the ocean. He'll always turn the corner at the end of his little description and say, I'm actually talking about something much deeper than whaling or whales. And so the stars are an even vaster ocean, an even deeper canvas upon which to deal with the most profound issues that we can possibly deal with. But not only that, they also rise and set in the exact same way that the sun rises and sets as we rotate on the Earth, which I believe is a sphere. I get people that write in after I post a video and say, I love the video, but how come you don't know the Earth is flat?
Oh, man, that still hasn't gone away. Come on.
Well, no, it's a lot less now, but I have written a big, long blog post about, hey, here's 12 reasons, even if you don't go up in a space shuttle, that you can know that the Earth is a sphere. But anyway, setting that aside, because the Earth spins on its axis, or if you prefer, the stars are moving from the sun and everything in the heavens is moving from east to west, whether it's the Earth spinning that causes that or not, which I think it is. But because those stars are rising in the east and setting in the west, and then they disappear for a time and then pop back up, they become a metaphor for those spiritual things that you're talking about. How you said, look, down here in this material world, we have things to worry about. We have to get coffee or we feel tired, at night, or we have to eat food or else we'll eventually die, or we got to drink water. So it's very easy to get just caught up in the physical world, but the stars turning across the sky actually picture this for us. They rise up out of the earth and cross this spiritual realm where there's the higher elements are up there in the sky. If you think of the ancient 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water, and then there's a 5th element too. But the higher elements of fire and air would be up in the heavens. That's where you would see the sun, fiery body crossing through the air, the ether. The stars are fiery bodies that are moving across. So those are the higher elements up there, fire and air. And then down here on earth, we've got the lower elements, water and earth. Up there in the heavens, you don't see the lower elements of water and earth. But down here, our bodies are made of, the Bible tells us, and also other ancient mythologies, including like the ancient Greeks said that Prometheus made men and women out of clay. And what's it talking about? The lower 2 elements, water. Clay is composed of water and earth. So when the stars plunge down into the west, they sink down into the lower realms. They disappear into the horizon of earth and water. That is representative of our plunge down out of the realm of spirit into this lower realm. And these myths that are using these great cycles are telling us, don't just get caught up in the fact that you're in this lower realm. You need to reconnect with, there's actually a spiritual realm. It's very real. You have a spiritual component. It's very real. You probably intuitively kind of sense that already. Nobody wants to just be thought of for their physical body. Everybody wants to say, hey, I'm more than just my physical body, just like the intro that you have on your show.
Yeah.
That's what they're talking about. And when the stars cycle down into the lower realm, it's representative of our own journey our own condition. We're down here in this lower realm, but there's this upper realm as well. So there's this great cycling that is going on. So it's a metaphor for some deep concepts that they're talking about, and I'll show you a little bit how that works. I would say that the story of Adam and Eve is a very good one for seeing this at work. So when I say that all the stories are speaking a celestial metaphor, I mean these characters line up with actual constellations that we can see in our night sky. So in the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent, there's a man and a woman and a serpent in the night sky that you can see, and the serpent that is right next to the woman so that it whispers into her ear. And the woman in this case, I believe, is Virgo, the constellation Virgo. And I've done a video on this so people can see it. And one of the problems we have is when I say the word Virgo or the constellation Virgo, it's very hard for most people to even envision what the outline of the constellation is. We can talk about that. I know we're coming up on our break, so I'm rushing a little bit, but it's hard for people to even envision the constellation Virgo. But the constellation Virgo has a distinctive outstretched arm, and the star that forms the outstretched arm, the end of that outstretched arm, is called Vinda Meatrix, which means the grape gathering hand or the fruit plucking hand. And it's Eve who reaches out to take the fruit. Then she offers it to the man, Adam, and right above Virgo in the sky is another figure, Boötes, and that's who I believe she's offering the fruit to. But right underneath Virgo is this long, sinuous serpent called Hydra. Right. And that serpent called Hydra is the serpent that whispers in her ear. And one of the ways, there's a lot more clues in the text that it's actually talking about stars. But so then the Lord comes and says, wait a minute, who told you were naked, and why did you eat from this tree? Right. And he casts them out of the garden, and he casts out the serpent. The serpent goes first. And in the night sky, as the stars are rotating towards the west, as they sink down into the west, the serpent Hydra disappears first. And actually, he says, you're going to crawl on your belly and eat dust. And the way the constellation looks, the constellation Hydra, it actually does, when it meets the horizon, looks like it's eating dust. Then it disappears. Then he casts out from the garden the woman. He casts her out second. And Virgo does go out of the sky second. Then he casts out the man, and he says, from dust you came, dust you art, dust thou art, unto dust you shall return, from dust you came. So, well, that's because the constellations rise up out of the dust in the east, and they sink down into the dust again in the west. So Boötes, he goes out last. The man is cast out last in the text. The constellation sinks down last after the serpent and the woman have both sunk into the west. They've been cast out of the garden, out of the heavenly garden of Eden, the paradise. So he came out of the dust on the western horizon. He went through Eden, then sinks back down into the dust in the east. And then to cap it all off and to tie into what you were talking about, the meteor shower that's going on right over this weekend, the Perseid meteors come out of, they're named that because of the constellation Perseus. So as those three are sinking out of the sky, another constellation is rising up in the east of Eden, and that's the constellation Perseus. And if you look at the end of that chapter of Genesis, it's chapter 3 of Genesis, the last couple verses talk about what did the Lord put at the east of Eden to keep them away from coming back to Eden. Do you remember?
Was it a flame, something?
There you go. That's right.
Flaming sword or whatever.
That's right. It's an angel with a flaming sword. And that is the constellation Perseus. In fact, the sword turns every which way, or turns in all directions. And Perseus has this special sword. We can talk about it. I know we're coming up on a break, but he has a curved sword that actually turns in all directions. But even the name Perseus is related to the ancient root of that word is fire. Like pyromaniac, Perseus, Persians, even Peru, I believe, might be related to this. But anyway, this name of Perseus indicates fire. It's a very bright constellation. It's the shining angel at the east of Eden. It's rising in the east, just as the man and the woman and the serpent are sinking down in the west. So that's a really clear, there's more details in there, but I'm just giving the sense for your listeners of how these constellations, actually the stories themselves are built on the constellations, but it doesn't mean that they're not true. It just means they're not intended to be taken literally. They're telling us very true things about, look, we came from the spiritual realm, but we've been cast down into this earthly realm. We've been given coats of skins. In fact, the Lord gives the man and the woman coats of skins to cover their nakedness. We're like a celestial being that's been given a coat of skin. You can reach down to your arm and wiggle around your coat of skin because you're wearing a coat of skin right now. So that's what they're talking about. They're talking about these profound things. And yet if we only take them literally, I think their meaning actually gets inverted. Then it gets turned into, oh yeah, it says the man has to rule over the woman. No, that's not what it's the constellation of Boötes is above Virgo in the night sky, but it's the reason she's the one who plucks the fruit is because of the outline of the constellation. It's not saying that that one type of person is any less than another. What it's really saying is we're all much more than our physical outward appearance. We all have a spiritual, infinite component. So if you take the scriptures and you just use them to look at the outside of someone and say, oh, she's a woman, she has to listen to me, then you've messed up. You've inverted the whole thing and made it backwards, because it's saying don't get caught up with the outer physical appearance. That's the exact opposite what I'm trying to teach you, or what the scriptures, I think, are saying.
Yeah, it says, be not a study of the letter, I believe.
Yeah, and there's lots more we can jump into on that. But that's just an example of how they use the constellations. But I believe that by taking them literally, we actually can miss the truth, right, as opposed to finding the real truth. The truth is the opposite of what we get when we literalize them sometimes.
We got to take a break. I told you guys, fascinating stuff. We'll be right back with David Mathisen. You don't go anywhere.
Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now. The Paranormal Radio app. Free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Hey, it's Grace. Can we talk about something serious for a minute? Your age. Getting old has its perks. But remember, being a few years younger, you know, your hair was thicker, you didn't have so many wrinkles, that extra weight wasn't haunting you, and you just felt better. Well, we can't turn back the clocks and go back 10 or 15 years, but you can start feeling and looking 10 or 15 years younger with Nature's Youth RSF. It's a doctor-formulated daily supplement that helps your body maintain its peak performance and fight the aging process. Imagine sleeping better, looking better, and feeling better. See how Nature's Youth RSF has helped thousands of people just like you at nature'syouth.com. nature'syouth.com. Imagine how it will feel when your family and friends are asking you what you did to look so good. Your secret will be Nature's Youth RSF. It's time to start looking better and feeling better. Learn more and order your Nature's Youth RSF at nature'syouth.com. That's nature'syouth.com. That's nature'syouth.com.
This is Reverend John M. Polk from johnpolkmedia.com, and you are listening to KTLK, The Fringe FM.
Hey folks, Guess what the number one phrase that Life Change Tea receives by email? You ready? We love this tea. We love this tea. Time after time, week after week, we love this tea. Life Change Tea gives you more energy, a beautiful cleansing, and fulfills its slogan perfectly. The tea that makes you go. So if you want to be on your health game, log on to getthetea.com and order Life Change Super Strength Tea. Packages come in a 1-month supply, and when you brew this stuff, wait until you see the results. Aren't we all about the results? And with a lot of people's health struggling, we can use a little bit of help. Doctors will tell you disease starts in the gut. So log on to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Be our next email saying, I love this tea. I love this tea. Get the tea at getthetea.com. Helping America one tea bag at a time.
The Fringe FM has some of the best shows in paranormal, like Lighting the Void, The Paranormal Code, Into the Paranormal, The Secret Teachings, and so much more.
Yeah, baby.
We're live every night with hours of live original programming. Plus, we air some of the best shows in this genre, and we're not afraid to tell it like it is.
I want the truth!
Check us out at thefringe.fm. Follow The Fringe FM on Facebook and Twitter at The Fringe FM.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
The truth is out there.
There's something out here.
And so are we. KTOK Digital Broadcasting, The Fringe FM.
Welcome back to Lighting the Void. I'm your host, Joe Roop. We are live on the Fringe FM. We are here with David Mathisen, and we're talking about the star myths. His website, starmythworld.com. I forgot to mention, too, David also attended West Point Military Academy, and he's got a bachelor's degree. I've always talked about people's education in the bio, and it just slipped to my mind. David, I apologize about that. Can you fill us in on where you went to school and your background a little bit? My bad. I'm sorry.
No need to apologize. And I also apologize if anybody, I slipped into my fake Southern accent there where I was taking the part of a literalist interpretation. I don't want anyone to think that I'm, I lived a long time in the South. After I graduated from West Point, I was stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia. I was in the 82nd Airborne in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I was a company commander at Fort Hood, Texas. And I've spent some time in Arkansas.
Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah. I dated a girl pretty seriously from Texarkana at one point. So I've been there down, I think it's called State Line Road there in Texarkana. But I was stationed in Fort Hood, Texas. One of my sons was born in Fort Hood, Texas there. And the other one was born when I went and got a master's degree in literature at Texas A&M in College Station, Bryan College Station. So I was in the Army for about 11 years after West Point. So West Point's 4 years, and that's the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, New York. And then right after that, I went down to Fort Benning. And in fact, even while I was at West Point, every single summer, it seems like I ended up either at Fort Knox or Fort Benning. I went to airborne school and air assault school and lots of other Army schools, Ranger School. After I graduated from West Point, I went to Ranger School, which starts at Fort Benning.
You got to jump out of some airplanes, huh? That's fun.
Yep, jumped out of lots of airplanes. In fact, I was a jump master in the 82nd Airborne. I was in a line infantry regiment of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. So.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating. At what point did you start thinking about this? I mean, was it when you jumped out of them planes and happened to look up, or was it way before then?
Well, that's an interesting question. So actually, that's when I became a literalist Christian. When when I was in the 82nd Airborne, I was jumping out of airplanes. The job that I had at one point, after I was a platoon leader, later on I became something that's called the S1, which is a battalion personnel officer, and he jumps out first on one door, and the chaplain jumps out first on the other door. And the reason is, when you get down to the drop zone, the battalion personnel officer, the S1, has to get accountability of every single person that jumped out of those airplanes and find out if anyone's still up in the airplanes or if someone's missing down on the ground, hurt somewhere. So in a combat situation, that guy always jumps out first and starts getting the reports from all the different companies to find out if everybody's accounted for, and also to get the medics to help anyone who's injured. And that's the same reason why the chaplain goes out first, because he's got to get there. If someone's grievously injured and is actually going to potentially leave the physical realm and go into the spiritual realm, the chaplain's got to get there. So anyway, I was spending a lot of time with the chaplain because we were always jumping out first on either side of the airplane. And then when we got down, when I was in that particular job, I was in a little headquarters. It was not the command post, not the main command post. It was like the secondary command post. That's where I hung out with the chaplain. So anyway, I spent a lot of time talking to the chaplain. That's how I became really a literalist Christian. And I was going, so I just wanted to emphasize, I'm not making fun of the South at all.
Sure. No. I get it, man. Believe me.
And actually I went to Southern Baptist churches,
Me too.
For a long time. So anyway, later on, I got a chance to go back and teach at West Point, which was a fantastic experience. I was a literature major, and I got to teach in the Department of English and Philosophy at West Point, and I got to teach the Odyssey, which is one of my favorite. I've always been fascinated by the myths growing up, and also by the stars. When I was young, and we should talk about the system of outlining the stars. When I was young, my dad got me these books by H.A. Rey. And I've talked about this on a lot of shows, but it's really important. As I mentioned, sometimes people have a hard time even understanding what I'm talking about because the actual constellations are not well known. They're not well understood. We don't get taught the constellations in school. And even if we did, they'd probably teach them to us wrong. Because even if you go on Wikipedia or on various cell phone apps, you will see that the outline of the constellation is really not helpful for seeing it in the sky. It's not helpful for remembering it. And it's certainly not helpful for understanding how the myths are connected to the stars. But H.A. Rey in 1952, and everybody, when I say H.A. Rey, a lot of people are probably saying, wait, I know who that is. Isn't he a children's author? H.A. Rey wrote, along with his wife Margaret Rey, wrote and illustrated the Curious George books.
Oh, yeah.
So H.A. Rey created Curious George, and he also apparently loved the stars. I mean, it's obvious that he loved the stars because his book, The Stars, A New Way to See Them, is it's essential, really, because those outlining systems line up with the texts of the ancient myths. And as far as I know, H.A. Rey never mentioned this. And as far as I know, nobody else has ever made this, or at least written about this connection before. But I grew up with that system. And that system enables you to see these things, just like what I was telling you about how Virgo has her arm. She has an outstretched arm. That's one of the distinctive features of that constellation, and it plays a role in many myths, not just in the Bible, but in myths from Africa, in Australia. The female figure will sometimes have a stick that she's using to dig for snakes. Remember how I said there's this constellation Hydra right underneath Virgo? So she's using this stick to dig for snakes, and some of these myths from Australia that I write about in one of my books. So I grew up loving the stars, looking for the stars at night. And yes, when I was in the Army, I was in the infantry, I was sleeping out under the stars, actually not doing a lot of sleeping sometimes during the night. That's when you're doing a lot of moving through the desert, moving through the woods, moving through the swamps. And I remember one night I was actually out at Fort Irwin, California at the National Training Center, which is a big desert, beautiful desert, very stark desert. And I looked up in the sky. It was the middle of the night. I had to go make a radio call. And I got up and walked across the desert floor to where the main battalion radios were. And I looked up in the sky and I said, whoa, that must be a comet. I had never seen a comet so big and so bright. It was the Hale-Bopp comet. So anyway, I spent a lot of time looking at the stars, but I didn't encounter any writing about the connection between the myths and the stars until later, after I'd gotten out of the Army, after I'd taught at West Point, after I'd taught the Odyssey at West Point to cadets. I encountered this book called Hamlet's Mill that authors like Graham Hancock refer to. It was actually Graham Hancock in, I think, Fingerprints of the Gods that pointed me towards Hamlet's Mill. And when I read Hamlet's Mill, which was published in 1969, on these subjects, I was fascinated by the thesis of that book is that all these ancient systems, which are basically lying in ruins and people don't even really understand them, are encoding all this celestial knowledge. And I just had to delve into that deeper. So I really started to try and decode what was going on.
Right.
And the outlining system of H.A. Rey comes in very handy for seeing these connections. In fact, not to put down the authors of Hamlet's Mill, because they do a great job of showing that something is going on, but their book is really confusing. And part of it is because they published that in 1969, but I don't think they actually were using, I'm almost positive they were not using, because you can look at the diagrams, they were probably not aware of the system that H.A. Rey had published in 1952. So they missed a lot, and they actually, I think, make some mistakes in there. But I'm not trying to take away from what they accomplished.
No.
But when you use it's like they perceived that something was going on.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, David. What before we get into the myths and stuff, what do you think that this ancient system? I mean, it's in theory, okay, just in theory. What do you think it's trying to tell us?
Right. So I'm not sure anybody knows. So I don't pretend to be the prophet of the ancient system. I'm not holding myself up as any different than anybody else. I grew up in California during the 1980s. I went off to West Point in 1987 after I graduated high school, class of 87. I'm just an ordinary person, just like anybody else. I am not claiming to be speaking. I point people to the myths themselves and say, look, if you want to know what they're saying, I mean, I've got some opinions. I'll tell you my opinion.
Yeah, that's all I'm wanting to know. I'm not trying to.
But the first thing I'll tell you is I think the best thing to do is to ask the myths themselves, to go to the myths and say, hey, what are you trying to tell me? But the problem is if you're listening to them in the wrong language, if you don't understand the language they're speaking, then they're going to tell you something and you're going to be like, that's bizarre. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I think what's happened is you have people trying to interpret them for you saying, oh, yeah, I speak literal myth. And then they interpret it as if the myths are speaking this literal language, and they're interpreting something. It's almost like a comedy routine where a guy comes in from another country and you don't speak the language of that person and you're trying to serve him some dinner. You know, he's visiting your house from, let's say, southern China or somewhere that speaks a language that not a lot of people in California or Arkansas, let's say, speak. And you're trying to be a good host and you're serving all this food, and your friend over here pretends like he knows the language that the visitor is speaking. And he says, and every time the visitor says something, he misinterprets it to turn it on its head.
Yeah.
He has no idea what the guy's saying.
I get what you're saying. A lot of people wanted me to have Santos Bonacci on here to talk about this stuff, but I really honestly think that you're getting somewhere with it. I mean, it's one thing to decode it and say, okay, this is the parallels, which is fascinating. Look, all our mystery schools are based on this stuff, and religions and a lot of things are, in my opinion, are based on this thing. But I've also picked up books, David, like Gnostic books that, it's just crazy stuff, but I'm like, this is kind of cool. Samael Aumbior talks about how he can astrally travel to each different constellation, and he has to go through the pillars of Jachin and Boaz that are kind of You see that in the mystery schools, and you got to know this password and which element it belongs to. And it's like he's traversing these spiritual realms through these constellations, stuff I've never heard before. And then I've also picked up other astrology books like you're talking about. He's talking about that's what they mean. And this other guy's telling me from a whole nother astrology book, and I forget the name of it, that each one of these constellations is actually inside us, and it's some type of archetype or thing that we have to go through and conquer before we become alchemized. And that's what this whole thing about being tried in the fire is about. And you see what I'm saying? So there, you're right. There's a lot of different interpretations of this, but what you're saying
no,
is
actually, you brought up a lot of good things to talk about in there. So first of all, I think Santos Bonacci is great. I don't necessarily agree with every single thing that he says. In fact, lately he's been saying some flat earth things, which I don't agree with, but
either.
But his videos are, I think, very good, very deep, very insightful. And I one of my books, The Undying Stars, you can see that he's one of the people that I dedicated that book to. So he helped me a lot. His videos helped me a lot, and we've exchanged emails. I've never met him in person, but I'm really more talking about the literalist interpretation that turns it on its head more when, in this little comedy scheme that I was kind of sketching out. If the person came and said in their language, "Oh, your food cooking is so good, and I'm really grateful for your good hospitality," and then your friend turns to you and says, he said that your food is really burned and overdone and not very tasty at all, and he's really insulted at the shabby treatment that he's getting, and you go, "Oh my goodness, I'm so humiliated, I'm so embarrassed. What can I do to fix it?" And meanwhile, the guest doesn't even know that your friend is playing a joke on you. That's kind of what I think has happened in some of these cases. Now, I think the mystery schools are trying to get to the esoteric teachings. Mm-hmm. So, and in fact, you mentioned mystery schools. The mystery schools, first of all, the literalists shut down the mystery schools when the Roman Empire became literalist and Christian. So I talk about this a little bit in some of my writing. So what I think has happened is the ancient wisdom has been suppressed. So a lot of esoteric teaching had to go underground in places where literalist Christianity actually made it illegal, like, hey, death penalty if you are getting into the esoteric or the occult side of things. I think that what these myths are talking about, there is a zodiac inside of you. There is an as above, so below. But I believe that they're operating on very profound. These things are multiple layered. They are so profound. Whoever gave these to humanity, it is from the divine realm. It is amazing. It is multi-layered. So when I say, well, it could mean this, I'll talk about some of the meaning of it, but it has many, many layers. But one of the keys to it is that we have an internal connection to the infinite. The answers are actually inside of you. What you need, you have access to it. The gods that, and I'll give you an example from the Odyssey that I really like. The gods help Odysseus, but they do it. He has to, they're actually operating through him. And the gods are, I believe, real, but they're operating through us, and we have access to them immediately. In fact, in a lot of myths, when you say the name of a god or you invoke a god or a goddess, they will show up immediately. Thor, for instance, in the Norse myths, whenever it says it several times in the actual texts of the Epic text, the Eddas, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, that when the gods are in real trouble, if Thor isn't there, all they have to do is say his name and he shows up. In the ancient scriptures of ancient India, the Sanskrit texts of ancient India, in the epics of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which is, it's spelled like Mahabharata, but I think they pronounce it Mahabharata mostly. But anyway, those gods will show up. When they're invoked, they will show up in an instant. They will show up immediately. And that's because they're always present they're ready to work through you. So in the Odyssey, there's a point where Odysseus is the story of the Odyssey. He's trying to get back home after the Trojan War.
Right.
And he's been delayed, and he's been imprisoned on this island by this goddess. And the goddess finally, actually, with some urging from the gods, Athena goes to Zeus and says, hey, how long are you going to let Calypso keep Odysseus on this island? He wants to get home to his family. His house is in a shambles. His son and his wife are in grave danger. And in fact, they're in kind of a self-destructive situation. We can get into all that. But so the gods send Hermes, the messenger of the god, down to Calypso and tell her, hey, you have to let Odysseus go. So he gets on a raft. Poseidon immediately smashes the raft. Poseidon's mad at Odysseus because of the Cyclops. But anyway, then Odysseus is in the ocean. He actually gets some help from a goddess. But in the ocean, he finally gets to landfall, and there's this forbidding rocky cliffs that the giant ocean waves are pounding up against, and he doesn't think he can land on the. And you can actually see in the text of the Odyssey, he's starting to panic. He's starting to despair. He doesn't think he's going to make it to the shore. And then Athena helps him. She gives him some encouragement, and because he was actually losing it, he was panicking. He was self-destructing, and then he starts swimming again with more confident strokes, and he starts moving up the shore until he sees a river mouth flowing out into the water, and he says, "Oh, that might be a place that I can land." And he senses the god of the river, because all the rivers have gods or goddesses associated. That Odysseus senses the god of the river. He asks the god, "Hey, can you please allow me to land? I'm in deep trouble here. I'm almost exhausted." And the god brings him into the shore. And what I would say is those gods and goddesses helped Odysseus, but you could even explain it from a psychological. I don't think it's merely psychological, and I put that in quotation marks because psychology is actually very deep. But he was panicking. He found these reserves of strength. Where did he get them from? You could say he got them from the gods. You could say it was from his subconscious, whatever, however you want to interpret that. But he's in tune. Odysseus is in tune to hear the messages from the other realm. And that's what we're supposed to be becoming more in tune with our higher self. The myths a lot of times have twins, and one twin is divine and one twin is mortal. That's because we have a higher self. We have a divine twin who sticks closer than a brother. We can talk about that.
That's a Bible. Gemini that's a Bible comes from too, right?
Gemini, the twins of Gemini are Castor and Pollux. Pollux is divine and Castor is mortal. So it's a picture of our situation. We are here in this physical realm. We have these physical failings, and we have this limited view, but we have to become more aware. We have to expand our perspectives a little bit to hear the divine realm, and that will actually help us in actual practical situations, like you're swimming to shore and and the shore has rocky cliffs and terrible waves, and you've got to figure out how to get back to shore. It's very practical. It's also very profound. So there's many layers to this, but that is one layer of what I think is going on. So I'm not saying, I would say that the esoteric teachings that you mentioned are trying to go in this direction as well. So I'm not, if I come to some different conclusions, I'm not saying my conclusions are right or anybody else's are wrong. I'm saying the way you're going to get to the right conclusions is by listening to the myths in the language that they're actually speaking. And they are speaking an esoteric language. They're speaking a spiritual and metaphorical language. They're not speaking a literal language.
Right.
But
real quick, I got to say, David, it sounds to me like you've got so much information about this super complex and awesome subject that it's kind of hard to get your point across, about how big this thing really is. I mean,
that's my fault.
No, well, I can hear you on several shows. You've got, I don't think anybody's going to be able to sink all this stuff in without really studying it and going through all the books. But I just have this feeling that there's way more to the night sky. I mean, even Crowley knew. He built a whole religion about it. You know, the sky goddess, Nuit or whatever. He built, you know, they knew something was there, but they all had their own ideas about this thing. And, you know, we were talking during break about the vision of Ezekiel. People saying, well, it's aliens. Well, I wanted to ask you about that, too. And we can skip through this break because I don't want you to rush. I mean, I own the network, too, so I can skip a break when I want. All right, so what do you think about that? Because I'm really curious about that. Like, I'm trying to learn what all this means myself, okay? But the quaternary thing that we were talking about, the vision of Ezekiel, do you have any idea what that's about?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. So this is a very vast subject, and I will say that, you know, it's very exciting to me that I think all this information is extremely helpful to people. It's at least very helpful to me. And I think it's really important information to explain kind of the grammar and the vocabulary that the myths around the world are using, not just in the Bible, but in these other myths, because it actually unites us together when you see that the myths of the Bible are built on the same system as the myths of ancient Greece, as the myths of ancient China. That actually unites us rather than the way it's been used is dividing us. So let me get into the vision of Ezekiel in a second, but one thing I'll say is, I wanted to bring this up when we started talking about the mystery religions and the mysteria. There are people who would say, and I think they have, you know, this is a valid point that I think about, wait a minute, why would you reveal these ancient mysteries? Why would you reveal these connections to the stars? Because I think these connections have been known for thousands of years, but they've been kept hidden. Now, I think in the ancient times, they were operating. The ancient mystery, the ancient wisdom was informing the culture. The Greek oracle at Delphi was being used. You know, the gods were being consulted, and the mystery schools, like the Eleusinian Mysteries, anyone could go to the Eleusinian Mysteries. Once a year, they had the Eleusinian Mysteries. Anyone could go to those, man or woman, free or slave, Greek or non-Greek. They didn't keep anybody away. So it was for everybody. And what happened was the literalist, when literalist Christianity came out, got hold of the Roman Empire, the Emperor Theodosius is the one who shut down the mystery schools at the end of the 300s AD, shut down Eleusis, which had been going for at least 8 centuries, probably for longer, shut down the Temple of Delphi. So I would say that just in answer to the question of, well, why would you explain all this? First of all, a lot of people don't even care about it, so those people are probably not going to delve into it. But there are some people who really need this, or are thirsty for it, or really hungering for it, or maybe they've been hurt by some literalist teaching, or they're actually afraid. Oh, wait a minute, I stopped going to church. Does that mean I'm going to go to hell? Or they've got people knocking on their door. They're actually threatening them with, eternal hellfire, and buzzards will tear out your liver, and those sorts of things. Yeah. Those are all based on celestial metaphor. So I would say, look, if a machine is working really well and smoothly, then maybe the only people who need to know about the insides of that machine is the technicians. Okay, but if the machine has badly gone off track and is now going around killing people and stamping out other religions and saying, your religion is no good, we have to replace it with this one, which is what happened in all of Europe. You know, my ancestors on my dad's side came from Scandinavia. The Norse myths were, the myths of that culture up until about 800, 900, and 1000 AD, depending on where you were. Iceland, about 1000 AD, they held on. But those got stamped out, viciously stamped out. Then it jumped across to the Americas, and then the literalists started stamping out the Native American sacred stories and traditions. So when you have a machine that's off the tracks and is is going around doing harmful things, then you better understand what is going on inside that machine that makes it work. So I would be sensitive to the idea of, hey, we shouldn't even reveal this, except for the fact that something has gone radically wrong. So I think in order to help people who have been hurt by that or who are wondering about that, and also this gives you the ability to then you can go and ask the myths, whether you choose to make the Odyssey your Bible, so to speak, or you choose to make the Ramayana or the Mahabharata your Bible. The Bhagavad Gita is in the Mahabharata. You can do
awesome
that.
Text, by the way.
Yeah.
Every one of them.
So you can use this system to understand how to listen to them in the language that they're speaking, and it will mean a lot more to you. Then you can start to say, oh, I see how this applies to my life. This is actually, oh yeah, when Beam, this really strong guy who's like a Hercules figure, is being squeezed by the python. Oh, that actually is applying to my life. That's actually me here in this world, and I have to get in touch with my higher self. I mean, it's once you understand the language that it's speaking, then you can go inquire of the texts for yourself, and you don't have to have me tell you what I think they mean or anybody else tell you what they think they mean. You can go talk to the myths in the language. You can ask the gods, you can ask the scriptures, you can ask the sacred myths of humanity, because that's why they were given to us. It's like Aristotle called them an ancient treasure, a precious inheritance. But I think that the actual meaning of it may have been lost long before Aristotle. So we know that this stuff is really, really ancient because...
Well, it's in Göbekli Tepe, which is super old, too. They're starting to see... they're seeing what Graham believes anyway is astrological correspondences on some of these things. And, anybody that's went to bat with him about that and has tried to say different, he's pretty much put them underground. So this stuff has been around a long, long time, probably longer than both you and I can imagine, I would think.
Yeah, so Göbekli Tepe is a really important piece of evidence, but let's set that aside for just a second. I agree with Graham Hancock. You're referring to Graham Hancock, and actually I mentioned I've got a book called Astrotheology for Life that came out in 2017 that gets into Göbekli Tepe a little bit, building on what Graham Hancock has found there. But so let's set that aside for just a second and say ancient Egypt, the earliest texts that we have, the pyramid texts, are referring to Osiris and Isis and the various gods and goddesses, and those texts are built on this system. I argue the earliest texts that we have from Mesopotamia, ancient Mesopotamia. So these are all from like 2,300, 2,400 BC, which is like 4,400, 4,500 years ago. Some of them maybe even as early as 3,000 BC. These texts, like the Mesopotamian texts, like the Gilgamesh Epic. The Gilgamesh Epic can be absolutely shown to be using this same system. So what does that mean? That means, and also the myths of ancient India, which are very ancient, the myths of ancient China, these are very ancient civilizations. They're the most ancient civilizations that academia, conventional historians will even admit to. If these texts, the earliest texts and the earliest myths from those cultures are using this system, that tells us that this system was well established before the earliest civilizations that even conventional historians will admit. So for a long time, there was no evidence of any sophisticated cultures prior, much older than those. And then Göbekli Tepe came along. I mean, obviously it's been here all along, but it started to come to light in the late 90s. People like Robert Schoch and John Anthony West were saying, hey, the Sphinx is much older. John Anthony West wrote Serpent in the Sky, where he says, look, ancient Egypt, these hieroglyphs just spring into being already in beautiful, perfect form, even in the earliest examples that we have of them. It's like ancient Egypt inherited some amazing advanced culture from somewhere else, but nobody knew where that somewhere else could have been. In fact, the conventional historians mocked and made fun of, and even worse, John Anthony West and Robert Schoch. They really tried to ostracize and humiliate them, and said, look, where's your pottery shards? Where's your archaeological evidence of anything older than ancient Egypt. And so then when Göbekli Tepe comes to light, that shows, we're talking about Göbekli Tepe was already buried by at least 8,000 BC, and it was probably created much earlier than that, obviously. So I actually have the figures in Astrotheology for Life. I don't have them off the top of my head, but it's so much
nice things to say when he came on this show. I call it, Jaws, but he had a lot of nice things to say. He said a lot of us, even today, have the, I guess, and it makes perfect sense. We have the inability to think with the heart. He said that we've lost that and we got to get back to that. So through all his studies and all the stuff that they found and everything that he knew as far as the history of Egypt, he still iterated that point that it was an internal lesson. It was something inside you that the Egyptians understood, the Sumerians understood, that he was trying to figure out as well through it. That's what fascinates us all. Like, this entire show is not about having gurus on and giving truth, so you don't have to worry about that. I named this show Lighting the Void because it was a show of questions, and that's all it was.
Right. And the answers are, you don't look to an external teacher. The answers are the gods will help you, or the ancient scriptures will help you. But I've obviously learned a lot from John Anthony West, and, we can talk more about that. The Göbekli Tepe finding is so important because it is so much older than it's as far older than ancient Egypt as ancient Egypt is older than where we are today. So when we look back to ancient Egypt, 3000 BC, think how far removed we are from ancient Egypt. We look back and say that's almost an unimaginable gulf of time. Well, the ancient Egyptians, if they knew about Göbekli Tepe and looked back to it, they would say, wow, that's an unimaginable gulf of time, because it was as ancient to them as ancient Egypt is to us. Well, that's amazing. And Robert Schoch believes that there was some kind of cataclysm. Göbekli Tepe was obviously deliberately buried. Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson talk about a cataclysm. Now, they differ on the mechanism. Robert Schoch has a different mechanism argument than Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. But the point being, it appears that this system, well, it's clear to me, the evidence is overwhelming, that this system was in operation by the beginnings of ancient Egypt, the beginnings of Mesopotamian culture, these ancient civilizations. So it's much older. It probably comes from some even far earlier culture of great spiritual sophistication and probably great, civilizational sophistication as well, but that may have been catastrophically wiped out, and only a few survivors then eventually got around and repopulated the world, because we find it around the world. We find it in the myths of the indigenous Maori of what we call New Zealand, Aotearoa. They have myths that are using the same system. The myths of Africa, of Australia, the indigenous Aboriginal people of Australia were thought to be isolated probably longer than almost anybody else. Their myths reflect this system. So I think it comes from a culture so much older that it had time after this catastrophe or whatever it was. Those people got around the world and repopulated it. They have the memories, the echoes of it.
Everybody throws around this idea too, David, of Atlantis. And I used to be like, yeah, that sounds really cool. Atlantis, right? And then I read some books about, Manly P. Hall really got serious about this whole Atlantis thing. And I was thinking, well, maybe there's something to it. And then for the first time, Robert Schoch even admitted, when I talked to him here on this show, he admitted, I would never say that word, Atlantis, but now I'm kind of toying with it a little bit. It's definitely a possibility. Who knows, right? But
it's pretty fascinating. Now, Plato, who gives us most of our texts about Atlantis that we know about, for sure was writing in parables, and some of them based on celestial metaphor. I talk about this in some of my writing. So Plato, I think, understood how to write in esoteric ways. So you can't always take everything he says as literal history, but he was definitely talking about a predecessor culture, and he even gives a timeline that, lo and behold, appears to line up with about the timeline. The destruction of Atlantis is about the same time that Göbekli Tepe was being deliberately buried to prevent its destruction in some kind of catastrophe, perhaps. Now, one thing you said was, hey, we've even found it in Göbekli Tepe. We don't have a lot of texts from Göbekli Tepe. We have these enormous, very smooth and sophisticated stonework creation of these thin, narrow stones that are obviously worked stones that are much, would take a lot more work than probably a hunter-gatherer society would be able to muster. And they have these incredible carvings on them. They don't have a lot of texts. And
Not yet.
Even if they do, I don't know that we would know the language that they would be in, but they do have some diagram or some artistic images on them that appear to line up with constellations and also show the sun moving through one. And that's something that Graham Hancock talks about in his most recent one. I forget the title of it. It's Of the Gods.
Fingerprints of the Gods.
Well, that was the first one, but this one is, I'm drawing a blank. Sorry. Apologies to Graham Hancock for
it.
It
happens, man.
I think it's got it on my bookshelf here somewhere. But anyway, they do appear to be using the same system. So it's pretty likely possibility that this ancient culture, whoever it was, is the source for all this. But we can't know for sure. So that gets us into the question of, okay, well, maybe it came from aliens. That's a very popular. I'm circling back to your Ezekiel. I didn't forget it. I went off on a long 17-minute, not necessarily a tangent, because I think it's germane to the discussion. I believe that it probably came from an ancient human culture, very advanced, at least spiritually sophisticated. It does not need to have come from aliens. Could it have come from aliens? Yeah, I don't know where it came from. Nobody knows where it came from. Anyone who tells you they know where it came from, I don't see how they know for sure where it came from. We've got some inklings that it could have been the culture that built Göbekli Tepe knew about it. Doesn't mean that they originated it either. It could have been somebody long before them. I don't know. But the use of these scriptures to say, oh yeah, they're talking about spaceships, and that, all the gods that they're talking about, those are all spacecraft, and those are all aliens that they saw from the planet, this or that star system. Unfortunately, my research kind of doesn't put me in that camp. So when you look at the fact that all these myths can be shown to be based on celestial metaphor, including the Vision of Ezekiel, I've got a whole video on that. It's a pretty good argument that you cannot use these texts to say, oh, Ezekiel was seeing a literal spaceship. Now, I know there's a lot of people who are very deeply committed to the ancient aliens paradigm. I'm not in that camp. I've written about why I'm not in that camp. The myths are based on celestial metaphor, and I'll talk to that in a minute. But that the attempt to make them into spaceships and aliens is a form of literalism. It's basically saying, oh yeah, these stories are they literally happened, and it was just human beings didn't know how to express it, so they did the best they could, and they talked about angels and gods and goddesses, but it literally happened. It's a form of literalism.
Well, can I tell you why I kind of agree with you on this real quick? Is that
go for it.
When I read the Vision of Ezekiel, this was back when I started learning about the elements, right? And, what corresponded with what element. The lion, the ox, the bull, or I can always get that wrong. The lion, the man, the ox, and the bull, I guess, are the eagle. The ox, the eagle, the lion, and the man, right? Which corresponds to the four elements, which corresponds to the four quaternaries in the zodiac, right? So when you see that in the Vision of Ezekiel, that was the first thing that triggered me. I was like, wait, this is a metaphor. You see what I mean? I didn't really know where to take it from there, but I knew that maybe this text is talking about something spiritual that's inside of me, not really something that's coming down, out of the sky.
Yeah. So, and I'll tell you, not only are your instincts correct on that, but there's even more evidence in the text that it is a celestial metaphor. So let me just quickly run down, not for self-promotion, but just run down the list of my books and tell you which book I talk about this in. Because as you mentioned kind of before we skipped the break, you said, hey, this is kind of a vast subject. I don't know how you even are able to convey any of it. And it's, it's a vast subject. It is I've written 8 books on this. So, and also a blog. I've got like over 1,000 blog posts in my blog, and I've got dozens of videos up on star myths of the world. So people can go peruse that. And I'm still working on the best way to try and explain this. And I'll tell you, back to what I said earlier, it's really hard for people to even envision it unless you're able to envision the outlines of the constellations. So the outlines of the stars of H.A. Rey that he gives, those actually match up with ancient artwork. So it shows he was onto something. He was either privy to this ancient system, or he came up with the right way to outline by his own genius on his own. He came up with the same way that the ancients did. But I've written a series of books called Star Myths of the World. Volume 1 is about various myths from India, Mesopotamia, Africa, Australia. Volume 2 is all about Greek myths from start to finish. It's about Zeus in the stars, Prometheus in the stars, the goddess Artemis. It goes into 3 full chapters on the Iliad, 6 full chapters on the Odyssey, and actually each chapter has 2 parts. There's an explanation half of the chapter. So each of those chapters is actually a double chapter. So, and then Star Myths of the World Volume 3 is all about the Bible. And that one has a whole section on the Vision of Ezekiel, and I'll go into it. I don't mind explaining it here on the air. I won't go into as much depth as I have in Star Myths of the Bible. I call Star Myths of the World Volume 3 is also called Star Myths of the Bible because it's all about the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, Book of Revelation, Gospel stories. Some of the miracles of Jesus can be shown to line right up with constellations. Star Myths of the World Volume 4 is just coming out right now. That's all about the Norse myths. And then I also have some books. Astrotheology for Life came out. That instead of just looking at one culture like Greek or Norse or the Bible, that goes with a pattern and shows it across different myths. So like the story of the retrieval from the underworld, where like in the myth of Orpheus, his beloved Eurydice, his wife, on the day of their marriage or the day they're supposed to get married, she's bitten by a serpent, dies. He goes down to the underworld to try and bring her back. It's usually an unsuccessful attempt to retrieve someone from the underworld. You might recognize that also in the Persephone myth. Demeter,
Isis,
the goddess,
Horus.
Yeah, right. So there's this retrieval from the dead pattern. So in Astrotheology for Life, I take various patterns and show them all the way around the world, including there's a retrieval from the dead story in ancient Japan. There's a retrieval from the dead myth all the way across North America among the different Native American cultures and tribes and nations. There are variations of this myth, very interesting variations that have even more celestial information in them than the ancient Greeks had. So these stories have been preserved around the world to different degrees. Sometimes we get more preservation in places like the Americas or in ancient India than we get in the Bible or in ancient Greece or whatever. So back to the Ezekiel passage. In Star Myths Volume 3, Star Myths of the Bible, I have a whole section on the Ezekiel passage. And in that passage, Ezekiel says he's by a river and he sees a whirlwind. This actually puts him in a certain place in the heavens. The river, what celestial feature do you think might represent a river? If you had to guess, what would be a glorious,
feature?
shining
I would say
river?
Probably a Milky Way, maybe.
Exactly. Perfect. So there is a figure next to the Milky Way who often plays a prophet or a priest, and that's Sagittarius. So the brightest part of the Milky Way, which is in the heavens right now, these months, August, the summer months, we see Scorpio and Sagittarius are on either side of this brightest part of the Milky Way galaxy. So you can see Scorpio in the sky right now. I actually just did a video not too long ago showing how to find Scorpio in the Milky Way, and also Ophiuchus right above Scorpio. But above Sagittarius, there's this glorious shining Milky Way. So he's by a river, and then there's a constellation that plays a whirlwind in a lot of different myths, and that's Hercules. So I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I'll tell you, yeah. So Hercules, the constellation Hercules, plays a whirlpool or a whirlwind in many myths. It's a very important constellation, and also plays a very powerful god, such as Zeus. Hercules is a son of Zeus. Hercules, the constellation, also plays the god Zeus with his thunderbolt, and he's a god of storms and lightning and thunder. So the wind corresponds with Hercules in this myth. So even the beginning verses of that, it's the first chapter of Ezekiel where this vision of Ezekiel is introduced. Then he talks about, okay, I saw this whirlwind, and then there are these, the likeness of the four creatures. I could read the Bible verse, but people could go read it for themselves. But the language is actually very important because it gives you celestial clues. So as you mentioned, he talks about the likenesses were of a man, an ox, a lion, and an eagle. And those are the four constellations of the man. In this case, I would argue, and I'm not the first to argue this, is Aquarius, not Gemini. It's right. Aquarius. Aquarius is opposite from Leo the lion. So what this shows is the constellations that ruled over the solstices and the equinoxes in a very ancient time, in the age of Taurus, not the age of Aries. So the age of Taurus, because of precession, which we could get into precession, I've got some videos about precession, but the age of Taurus was before the age of Aries, and the age of Aries was before the age of Pisces, which is finishing up right now. Right. We're on the cusp between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius. So this is 2 ages ago, and each age is approximately 2,160 years. So this is actually predates even the age of Aries, which is what most of the things in the New Old Testament are using the age of Aries set up, not the age of Taurus. The age of Taurus is even earlier than that, and then before that was the age of Gemini. But anyway, not to get off too much on a tangent, even ancient Christian fathers, they're called the fathers or the doctors of the faith, like Augustine, or sometimes he's pronounced Augustine, especially here in California, St. Augustine or Augustine. Irenaeus, who was even before, he was a generation before Augustine. Jerome and Augustine and Irenaeus and some other church fathers wrote about these four creatures and said, look, the reason we have 4 gospels, this is Irenaeus, who was even before Augustine. The reason we have 4 gospels is because there are 4 seasons. We must have 4 gospels, no more, no less. We've got to have 4. Why? Well, why do you need 4 gospels? Because they're talking about 4 seasons. Irenaeus even says it. Now, Irenaeus was a literalist he actually wrote this in a book called Against Heresies. So he's putting down the Gnostics. He's arguing against the Gnostics who are taking a more esoteric interpretation. And yet at the same time, he's revealing that he understands that this is an esoteric. He's saying, look, these 4 gospel creatures are related to the 4 seasons. The 4 seasons are they're dominated by the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the spring equinox, and the fall equinox. Those constellations are lined up with, in this case, in the age of Taurus, it was Leo was dominating the summer solstice. Aquarius was dominating the winter solstice. The bull, because it was the age of Taurus, the spring equinox, the return of the sun to the upper half of the year, the upper room, if you will, was in the sign of Taurus, the bull. And then Scorpio is on the opposite end of Taurus. Scorpio was at the fall equinox. That's when the sun would go back down to the lower half of the year in the fall, when the days started to cross over from being longer than the nights to being shorter than the nights. But instead of using a scorpion, they used an eagle. The constellation Aquila, the eagle, is right above Scorpio. So for whatever reason, the ancient myths used an eagle instead of a scorpion, and they do that sometimes. But eagle in the sky is right above Scorpio. You can see it. I said earlier, Ophiuchus is right above Scorpio, which it is as well. But you can see in the Milky Way, up from Scorpio and Sagittarius, there are the two great birds of the Milky Way. You can see them tonight. In the Milky Way, there's Aquila flying upwards and Cygnus, the swan, flying downwards. But anyway, that eagle corresponds to the fall equinox in this. So even the ancient church fathers knew that these four symbols from the Old Testament vision of Ezekiel, they lined them up also with the four Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So actually Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are also associated with those four animals. And you can even see this in older stained glass windows or older church paintings in Europe where they're painted on the ceilings.
You see it on the Sphinx too. That's funny
That's
enough
right.
you say that.
Yeah, so some sphinxes have all four of those creatures. Obviously, the Great Sphinx of Egypt is just a human head and a lion's body, and that's because I would argue a lot of times the Sphinx is a female head with a lion's body. That's because Virgo and Leo are right next to each other. So Virgo follows Leo, and they get merged together. A lot of times you'll have a goddess who rides on lions, or goddesses who are sitting in a chariot that's pulled by a lion, or goddesses that are seated on a throne that is flanked by lions. And that's because of Virgo and Leo's proximity to one another in the sky. But anyway, so there are other clues in that text also that are even more powerful that show that this vision of Ezekiel has to do with the celestial machinery. He talks about these wheels within wheels.
Right.
Okay. And what he's really describing is, if you think of and I show some diagrams in this book that I'm referring to, Star Myths of the World, Volume 3. I also have a video that's called The Vision of Ezekiel. So it's on YouTube. You can just search for, Mathisen Vision of Ezekiel, or you can go to my website, like I said, Star Myths of the World, starmythworld.com. There's a video section, and you'll find Vision of Ezekiel there, and it shows these wheels, these rings. If you are familiar with an armillary sphere, those are those kind of classic-looking spheres that are composed of rings. The word armillary means a sphere of rings that show the celestial equator, and then they show the ecliptic. That's a wheel within a wheel. And the way you know that is what the text is talking about is actually in the first chapter of Ezekiel 1 and verse 18, in the King James Version, it even says, they had also rings and height. And if you have a good edition of the King James, it'll have a little note that says, or strakes. It'll say, or strakes in the margin. The translators were honest enough to say they're talking about strakes. Now, I don't think there's too many people who know what strakes are. I didn't even know what strakes were until I looked it up.
I don't have a clue.
Yeah, it's obviously a term that was well known in 1611 when the King James Bible was translated, or that version was put together, but nobody uses that term anymore because we're not riding around in wagons with wooden wheels. But wagon with wooden wheels, these wheels were composed of sections of wood. Those wheels, I've got a picture of it in this book, and I've got a picture of it on my blog. I've got a couple blog posts that deal with the vision of Ezekiel. The strakes are the sections within a wagon wheel, a wooden wagon wheel. It wouldn't be made of one single piece of wood. It'd be made of these strakes that were connected together in segments. So the strakes of a wagon wheel is a perfect metaphor for the sections of the zodiac ring. If you think about the zodiac in the sky, it's this gigantic ring that's divided into the 12 sections of, okay, now we're in, there goes Taurus. Okay, there goes Gemini. Those sections, if you look at a armillary sphere, it will have the zodiac ring divided up into the sections of Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, just like the strakes of a wagon wheel. So what Ezekiel is describing is the mighty rings of heaven turning overhead and carrying these four creatures at the four important points of the solstices, the two solstices and the two equinoxes. As they spin, they are raised way up into the air. He says, oh, it's so high that it was dreadful. And then they plunge downward. That's because the zodiac band actually does that. It rises up. That's why the sun gets higher and higher in the sky. The ecliptic path of the sun gets very high at the summer solstice. The sun makes its highest arc across the sky, and it gets very low at the winter solstice. And during the night, the stars that are in that same path, the zodiac stars, they'll either be above the celestial equator or below the celestial equator, depending on what part of the year we're in. So it's talking about the mechanics of these awe-inspiring heavenly cycles. That's what he's describing in this vision. It's not because he's seeing a UFO and he doesn't have the words to express it. He's using very precise scientific language to explain the cycles of the heavens. He is not struggling for words. He's giving a brilliant metaphor for these awe-inspiring gears of the celestial machinery.
Right.
That is what's going on.
Thank you for explaining that. But I've always known that. I've just never knew how to explain it. I don't know what those rings are called. As soon as you started talking about it, I knew what you were talking about. I didn't know the name of it, actually, what it was called. The wheels within wheels model, I guess it looks like an atom where everything's kind of spinning around in different sections, you know.
Right. Well, you can look up armillary sphere. I've got one on my desk here. I'm spinning it right now. But you can look up armillary spheres, and those are the rings within rings, and they've got the straked wheel on them for the zodiac. It is a model. An armillary sphere is actually a model that shows us where the solstices are, where the equinoxes are. It shows it basically from the perspective of an observer on the Earth, so that we can see how the zodiac progresses through the year. So he's describing these awe-inspiring gears of heaven, but they all had a message to them. And that's where some of these esoteric teachers that you're talking about they're pointing to. It's not just talking about, okay, so they knew about the zodiac. Okay, so they knew that the celestial, the ecliptic goes up above the celestial equator, then it goes down below. Oh, they must have just been encoding some scientific knowledge so they wouldn't forget it. I don't think that's all they were doing. I think they had very sophisticated scientific knowledge. In fact, they understood precession, which is a hard thing to detect. We could talk about that, but probably don't have time. But they had sophisticated scientific knowledge, but that's not all they were doing here. They were using the Earth's these cycles, the Earth's path through the year, the turning points of the year have spiritual. It's like a spiritual code. Like I told you, how we plunge down into this world, but then we have this turning point where we start to say, wait a minute, I've been just running around acting as if I'm just physical. I'm just chasing, I'm just after monetary things, or I'm just after, meeting members of the opposite sex, or I'm just after kind of carnal, physical things. But wait a minute, I think there's more to this than just that. Isn't there something more? That turning point, they use these great turning points of the year to represent spiritual points on our journey. And that's why the Odyssey of, ancient Greece is not a literal terrestrial Odyssey. Like when I was teaching the Odyssey, we had all these old, videos from the 1960s. Well, Odysseus must have, this part of Odysseus is when he's in Sicily. And then this part is when he comes down to the island of Rhodes or whatever. No, it's talking about a voyage through the heavens. It's actually talking about our voyage through this incarnate life, because a part of that cycle represents our time down here in the lower half of the zodiac wheel. And it's talking about how to get back integrated with your spiritual self so you can be integrated and not just treating the world as if it's all physical, or thinking of yourself as if you're only physical. Because if you're if you're only physical, then when you die, that's it, lights out, and your skeleton starts to turn into dust at that point. Oh, so that's pretty grim. Well, actually, you're not just only physical. You already know there's a part of you that, it's actually incredible that you can think a thought and make, your breathing, your heart rate increase, or you can do certain types of meditation and exercise chi. Where does that come from? That even the fact that you can think a thought and move your finger, a physical finger can move around because of a thought, is actually kind of if you think about it too long, you go, wait a minute, that is kind of weird. How does that work?
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's where they got the correspondences from this? Because I don't know when it happened, but I do know that it did happen. At some point, somebody in these, at least in the mystery schools and a lot of our modern day mystery schools, related the 4 elements to each one of those things: earth, air, fire, and water, right? Like, for instance, Aquarius would be, I believe it would be air. I don't want to get it all mixed up, but, and, the air represents the intellect and some of those aspects, and fire is your passion, and earth is the earthly things about you, and water is your emotions, and you got to try to master all of them. And it's this whole alchemical process to become enlightened, more to say. That's what you get actually in a lot of these mystery schools that have protocols of initiation. And
right.
I don't know if they just, because when you research this stuff, there's a lot of correspondences that go along with each other, and it just fits so perfectly that I'm wondering if they wrote it out because it fits so perfectly, and then they just put it in there, or how old that goes back. I don't have a clue. If you get what I'm saying.
Right. No, I don't know, but I suspect that these traditions are preserving ancient knowledge that has been passed down, and it's been, I think, fragmented, and it's been persecuted. It's been tried to be stamped out. I think they're really one of the important turning points was when literalist Christianity took over basically the Roman Empire. Then where the Roman Empire covered, that's where the other forms of ancient wisdom were stamped out. The ancient Greek myths were, or the ancient Roman myths, or the Druidic cultures of Western Europe and the British Isles were actually actively pursued and stamped out by literalist Christianity, and then finally moving up into Scandinavia, where they stamped out the Norse myths and some of the shamanic traditions of the far north, like the Sami people. But there are cultures that the Roman Empire did not get to, like ancient India or ancient China. So I think in those cultures, you have the stream is less interrupted. So some of the traditions like yoga are thousands of years old, or Tai Chi, or some of the Qigong type practices and meditative practices, and some of the Tantra and Tantric, some of the cultures that didn't get overrun by the Roman Empire, the stream was preserved, I think, more completely, or at least there was less interruption. And then in the Western areas where the literalist Christianity held sway, I think a lot of that stream had to go underground. So it was flowing in these underground channels. And some of those traditions that you're referring to, I think, are mostly some of the Western esoteric traditions and the Western astrology. So I'm not an expert on those, but I can clearly see that they're using these same symbols. The tarot, the symbols of the tarot deck are celestial in nature. The symbols, the teachings that they're preserving are ancient esoteric spiritual traditions that have survived through these underground streams and channels. What I'm trying to do is piece together the grammar, if you will, of the language that these ancient myths are speaking. So I'm mostly looking back to the ancient myths more than I don't spend a lot of time studying those esoteric traditions. I'm mostly looking at the ancient myths and saying, okay, now that I understand which constellation is which, you can see, like I said, in the Norse myths, you can now read, once you start to speak the language, you can read the Norse myths and say, okay, well, this is clearly, this god corresponds to this constellation. And oh my goodness, isn't that interesting? That same constellation, there's a match between the Norse myths and the myths of ancient Greece, ancient India, some traditions in the Americas where the same constellation is in play and the same characteristics of that god or goddess are being described in these myths that are treated as if they're all separate. Oh yeah, there's no connection between the Norse myths and the myths of ancient Japan. Well, yes, there are. I don't know how there are, but there are clearly connections. So because they're all using the same system.
I see what you're saying. So where a lot of people have related this to Western culture, as far as this goes, and you're actually finding this in every culture. I don't know about every, but lots of cultures, lots of religions, just about all of them, from what I've seen here. I mean, and what is the most common myth? Like, because there's a ton of myths, there's a ton of stories, right? What's the most common one that you see in all of these different cultures?
Yeah, I say virtually every culture, because there may be a culture out there that doesn't, but I will tell you, I think it is virtually every culture, because I think we're all connected, and I think we're all probably descended from the survivors of whatever that cataclysm was so many thousand years ago. So the flood myth is certainly one that is extremely widespread. It's around the world, and there's obvious signs of a cataclysm on our Earth. Okay, we could spend a whole 2-hour show just talking about the signs of a cataclysm deep under ocean trenches. My first book was actually a lot about a global flood, and using the Hydroplate Theory of Dr. Walt Brown, who's also a West Point grad, class of 1959. And at the time I wrote that, I was taking the Bible literally, but there is clearly signs of a cataclysm and massive flooding on our Earth, like massive, more than regional flooding. Okay, so a flood myth is around the world. It's universal, but the flood myths, I have come to the conclusion that the flood myths in the Bible and in the ancient Greece and in all these other South America, there are flood myths around the world, ancient China, they are celestial in nature. That doesn't mean that we didn't have cataclysmic flood or floods. We did. I think there's pretty clear. When that was, I don't know, because the flood myths themselves are celestial in nature, and I believe they have to do with actually our passage through this lower realm. Like I was saying, the lower elements of earth and water, we're told that we're made of clay, because while we're down here in this incarnate part of our journey, we're down in the lower part of the cycle. We're encased in the physical body, but we still have a divine spark inside. And that's what these flood myths, they're actually saying, if you go through the flood, that is the way to become reconnected with your inner divine nature, to reconnect. So in the biblical flood myth, Noah, there's certain promises that are given to him after he goes through the flood. And then in the 1800s, some Mesopotamian tablets, very ancient, were discovered. And when they were translated, these Cuneiform Tablets, when they were translated, one of the translators, he was a young translator in the British Museum, I think, or in Oxford, was translating these tablets, and a lot of them were like, okay, so-and-so sold 1,000 bushels of grain to so-and-so, and they're, all these kind of mercantile records and just kind of boring records. And then all of a sudden he translated one, and he became so distraught and confused and like excited that he actually started taking his clothes off, which, right there in the middle of the museum or wherever he was translating it, because it was it was basically a flood legend that was so close to the biblical flood legend. He was just shocked. And I guess when I was at Fort Hood, actually, there was a captain who kind of lost it. I didn't know him, but he he snapped and started taking his clothes off in the middle of a used car lot. I was trying to buy a used car. I don't know what happened after that, but it, caused quite a stir. But I guess psychologically, sometimes when people get so distraught, they take their clothes off. So this learned translator was translating these texts, and he found this flood myth in these ancient Mesopotamian tablets, and he was quite shocked because they were much older than the Bible, or at least the biblical records, and he didn't expect to see that there. Anyway, in that story that it's found in the Atrahasis, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. Sumerian and Akkadian language expert could correct me, but the Atrahasis or the Atrahasis, however it's properly pronounced, has a guy named Utnapishtim or Utanapishti, and you can see the Na is the same as Noah. There's actually Oannes. There's the legend of Oannes, the fish man.
And I thought that meant the water god or Oannes.
Yeah, that's right. Our name John is descended from that same Noah, Oannes. Irish people who are named John are usually Owen. Owen is related to Oannes. It's John, Oannes, Noah. It's the same sound. It's the same. It has to do with water. Anyway, Uta Napishtim, Na, that same Na sound relates to crossing the waters of the flood. Anyway, Noah does relate to Aquarius. I show that pretty clearly.
What you're saying, though. See, when you say things like this, these things, I'm so glad that I was brought up a Christian, by the way. I'm so glad that my dad used to make me read. I don't know if you know who Alexander Scourby is, but my dad used to force me to listen to Alexander Scourby while reading the Bible when I was a kid. That was a punishment I had to do, right?
I don't know who he is, but
yeah, but he's one of the greatest voices ever. Uh-huh. But when you hear John baptizing, right? I baptize with water, but there's someone greater than me that comes along that I'm not worthy of, and I'm just cutting it short here, and he's going to baptize you with fire. Well, John is Awana is water, Christ is Christos, it's fire, and there's the holy hexagram right there, the whole, the bridegroom, you could call it whatever you want to call it, the two energies coming together. There's a lot of stuff there.
It's the divine twins as well. There's a verse that says, he must increase, I must decrease, and actually John is Aquarius. He baptizes, the pictures of, even going back to the 1300s, pictures of John baptizing Jesus.
And
John
water.
is,
and you were just talking about the river, the flood, right? So think about that.
That's right. And John, the actual outline of John looks like the outline of Aquarius, that H.A. Ray. If you look at the outline of Aquarius on like Wikipedia, it won't give you any help. It's useless. But if you look at the outline of Aquarius from H.A. Ray and then go look at a picture of Jesus baptized, so my blog is fully searchable. If you go to starmythworld.com, you can find my blog, and then you can search for John the Baptist, or you can just search for the word Baptist. But there are pictures of John baptizing Jesus where John is almost always shown in the outline of Aquarius. Also, I have a blog called the Mathisen Corollary. That was my first book. I called my blog that because that was the only book I had at that time. So that's actually on Blogger. The same blog is on my website, but the reason I tell you about the Mathisen Corollary is Blogger is run by Google, and Google has, for whatever else they do that I disagree with, they've got a great search function. So the search bar on Blogger on my Mathisen Corollary is run by Google, so it's excellent. So I've got an internal search window where you can search for these things. You can search for the word Ray, as in H.A. Ray. He spells his last name R-E-Y, and then read what I've written in all these different blog posts about H.A. Ray's system. You can search for the word Baptist and read what I've written about, the celestial identity of John the Baptist with Aquarius. And I can go over a few minutes if you want to talk. I mean,
doesn't that boggle you though? Like the Jews were hardcore about their laws, what they did, their ceremonies and rituals that they practice. I mean, here we have a ritual called baptism that, in these texts, just comes along. It's nothing. There was nothing Jewish about it until John brought it there, and they just accepted it like it was okay.
Well, there's figures in the Old Testament that have to be washed in the water as well. There was, now his name's escaping me, but he
I just
had
think
leprosy.
that's a really old tradition is what I think that.
Yeah, that's right. That's
that
right.
Goes
and
way
Oannes, this fish creature, would come up out of the water and then dip back into the water at night. So, yes, I got off a little bit off topic of the Utnapishtim, but yes, it is amazing how all these correspondences, and they're in the Old Testament as well, like Noah, who goes through the flood, is an Aquarius figure, just like John in the New Testament. And in fact, in the Odyssey, Odysseus basically starts off his whole adventures with a baptism. He basically gets dunked in the water, and he's in the ocean for 3 days. That little episode I told you about was after he's been in the water for 3 days. And before he dunks into the water, a goddess comes to visit him. So let me tell the story properly. He's on the island of Ogygia, being held there by Calypso. Calypso, the goddess, loves Odysseus, doesn't want him to leave. She's this beautiful goddess. And every night he has to go sleep with her. He's like, I miss my wife, but I got to go sleep with this beautiful goddess. And she's like, Odysseus, why do you want to leave? I'm giving you immortality, eternal youth. You're never going to grow old if you stay here with me. How come every day you're out there on the beach crying because you want to get back home? And he says, well, I've got all these responsibilities. I need to get back home. I'm the last one. Anyway, finally, the gods send a messenger, tell Calypso, hey, you've got to let him go. So he makes a raft because he's this resourceful, he knows how to do just about anything. So he makes this fantastic raft, and he's off sailing across the wide ocean. And then Poseidon catches sight of him and says, what? Odysseus, I don't want him to get home. I'm still mad at him. And Poseidon churns up these waves and destroys Odysseus' raft, gets splintered into fragments, and he's clutching to a piece of wood and trying to paddle with his feet. And this is actually celestial. You find it in the stories of Sinbad the Sailor also, which is in the Arabian Nights, the 1001 Nights. But anyway, he's paddling with his feet, clutching this piece of wood, and a goddess comes to visit him in the form of a seabird, a sea, like a seagull or a cormorant, or it's actually the specific name is it slips my mind at this particular moment. And she tells him, listen, you have to let go of that piece of wood and you have to swim for it. You'll never make it if you just cling to that piece of driftwood of your broken raft. You've got to swim, but I'm going to give you this scarf to wear around your waist that will protect you. This is a pattern in many, many myths. So the goddess she says, you got to take off all your clothes and put on this garment of mine around your waist and then swim for it. She comes down in the form of a bird. And then he dives into the water. Actually, he's like, I don't know if I trust this goddess. And then a big wave comes and smashes him away from his plank. So he's like, well, I lost it anyway. I guess I'll have to trust her and swim for it. So then he takes off his clothes and puts on the scarf around his waist and swims for it. That's his baptism. There's a bird coming down at his baptism. Yeah. What happens in the baptism scene in the Gospels?
A dove ascended. Or descended,
the spirit comes down in the form of a dove. So it's the parallels in the Odyssey and the Bible are astonishing, and they're based on the stars. There is a foot washing scene at the end of the Odyssey. There's a foot washing scene at the end so there's a baptism scene at the beginning of the ministry of Jesus with a bird that comes down. There's a baptism, quote unquote, scene at the beginning of the Odyssey where he gets dunked in the water and a goddess comes down in the form of a bird. There's a foot washing scene at the end of the ministry of Jesus, right? We know about the foot washing at the Last Supper. Jesus goes around and washes the disciples' feet. There's a foot washing scene and a climactic scene in the end of the Odyssey where Odysseus' nurse is washing his feet. He's in disguise. He doesn't want anyone to know. And she notices this scar. She's the nurse who nursed him as a baby. She knew him when he was an infant. And she notices this scar that he got as a teenager while he was hunting a boar, and the boar gored him in the thigh. She notices this scar and she knows, oh my goodness, this is Odysseus has come back. I can't believe it. And he claps his hand over her mouth and is like, don't tell anybody. If you tell anybody, I'm dead, because there's these 108 suitors that want to kill me, that are trying to take over my household. I'm one guy against all of them. I've got to defeat them. So
that's a fine number, which is 9, actually, which I could go into that too, but I won't. But that's kind of coincidental.
It's not coincidental. It's also celestial. So anyway,
that's
the parallels.
My point, but yeah.
Yeah. The parallels are all based on the stars, and the constellations that do the foot washing are the same constellations in both of those. So it's like the stars are dressing in different clothing to get across the same message. It's the same message underneath. It's just the garments that they wear or the skin that they put on looks different in all these different cultures. But I would argue they're teaching us the same profound truths, and you can find them in every culture. That's why I think it's so wrong to go around like trying to stamp out one culture and say, no, only ours are correct.
Right.
But so
what do you think, though, David? This is the biggest question I have for you. When you say they're teaching us, it is truly remarkable, and I'm quoting somebody when I say this, it's truly remarkable how these ancient teachings have been handed down to us to this day from that period of a long time ago that could possibly be as old as a generation that we have never even thought of, super old. It just kept getting handed down story by story by story. There's two things that could be happening. There could be people that understand this that are writing these stories, but I find that highly unlikely. I think something else is causing people to write these stories this way. If you get what I'm saying. Like, I think spirit is coming through people, and that's the whole nature of art, to write these stories. It's in movies too, man. I mean, people write movies, and you see this stuff all in movies too. It's in everything.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think you hear great artists saying, I don't even know where this song came from, but I just, started writing it down. Or you have in the Bible, you have figures who say, I was in the spirit. I do think we have a connection to a higher self. And I do think that these stories probably almost certainly came from, there's a writer named Alvin Boyd Kuhn who I like a lot. He wrote a book called Lost Light that he published in 1940, which I think is one of his best. And he calls them, these ancient sages. He always writes sages with a capital S. Whoever they were, I think they were in contact with the spiritual realm. In fact, I think, the shamanic pattern that we find around the world, shamanic practices are worldwide. In fact, you could argue that the Bible has shamanic practices right in there. You have Daniel saying, I was lying on my face, in the spirit. Well, there's shaman practices where they lie on their face, full flat out on the ground. And that's when they go into their shamanic trance state. So really? I think that, like the Sami of northern they used to be called the Lapps, like Lapland, Lapp, but it's, I think it's more properly, they like to be called the Sami people. I'm not even sure, exactly what they like to call themselves, but it's often spelled Saami or sometimes Sami. So there are pictures of, the Sami shaman lying full flat on the ground, and they would use drums. Drums are used, around the world to go into trance conditions. So it is quite likely that these teachings do come from the spirit realm, and there are many ways to contact the spirit realm. Some cultures use different psychoactive plants or entheogenic plants and substances. Some cultures use drums. I think that the human body or organism is fine-tuned to be able to do that. I think we all kind of have a yearning or a desire to do that. I think there are some people who are especially attuned and capable of doing that, and they become, shamans or capable of more. There are certain people who are like designated to make that kind of contact, but I think everybody has that capability to some degree, and actually some desire to do that to some degree. And that's probably, that's why drugs and alcohol are, attractive to people, because everybody wants to get into that, in touch with spirits. We even call alcohol alcoholic spirits. So anyway,
the dream world too, David.
The dream
there is
world,
a theory
absolutely.
if we don't sleep, we don't go into REM sleep, if we don't disperse some dimethyltryptamine out of our brain every night a little bit, we can die from that. So we have to take a break from this physical reality in order to live. It's really trippy.
That's what I think these ancient, so if you're into yoga, or you're into tantra, or you're into shamanic travel, or you're into deep meditation, or you're into Tai Chi, Qigong, any of these ancient practices, I think all these ancient practices are given to connect us with that aspect of ourselves and the cosmos, that is spirit. And so these ancient myths are given to us to help us with that. It's like, why wouldn't you want to consult those guidebooks that were given to us? But I think you'll have a lot more success if you listen to them in the language that they're actually speaking, which is this celestial language. And we can learn how to do that. And that knowledge, I think, has been around for millennia, and we don't want it to be lost. And so I think that discovering it and learning about it is helpful to everybody. So that's why I'm writing what I'm writing and doing what I'm doing.
That's really cool, man. I've skipped 2 breaks and we've gone into the 3rd hour with you. So, I'm super interested in this subject, and I know that our listeners are as well. I'm looking at the Fringe FM stats. We got listeners all over the world tuning in to listen to this. So it's a cool subject. And I really believe that a lot of us, even though, from a scholarly point of view, you're well studied, man. I mean, that's why it's like, I've only got this amount of time to put this much information out. You can tell that you got so much you want to say. But I really do believe, David, that a lot of people, more now than used to, are starting to at least feel that there's some truth to this stuff inside them,
Yeah, it's the amount of evidence is overwhelming. And like I said, if you take the Bible literally, I don't want to step on your beliefs. I know I was right there. It would take an awful lot of evidence to change my mind when I was taking the Bible literally to believing that, wait a minute, no, this is celestial metaphor, but it is talking about these truths. The amount of evidence is overwhelming, and the more I study it, the more evidence I find, and the connections are just they're just staggering. But the amount of evidence in the myths themselves is overwhelming, and I would say it's like another body of evidence in addition to all these pyramids that we find around the world, and monuments, and the ancient monuments around the world that show that something about our ancient history, the conventional timeline is badly in need of radical revision, because our ancient history is more than what we've been taught. And the amount of evidence in myth stands alongside all the other evidence that people have found that show that our ancient history is something much more than what conventional academia is willing to admit right now.
Well, I totally agree with you. And I really want to say thank you so much for spending time with us. I'm going to let you go now because I know I've took you into the 3rd hour. I kind of knew we would do that, though. I'll be honest with you. I kind of had a feeling that was going to happen because, I really want you guys, if you're into this, to go check out his YouTube channel, go to the website at starmythworld.com, get his books, but just start with a YouTube channel and you'll definitely see what he's talking about. There are other people that are talking about these things too, but I don't know if they've made as many connections as David has with all the different teachings and myths. So again, I'm super impressed with it. Love to have you back on the show. And I do want to say again, thanks for coming on.
Hey, it's been my absolute pleasure, Joe. And thank you so much for having me on Lighting the Void. I think it's a great show. You're a great host and interviewer. I really have enjoyed and appreciated the conversation. I hope that the Lighting the Void void walking community enjoyed it, and I wish you all the best success with lighting the void.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. We'll be right back, guys, for Hour 3. That was David Mathisen, starmythworld.com. All the show notes will be there as well. We'll be right back, guys.
What's up? This is James Cruz. You listen to KCLK The Fringe FM.
Paranormal radio hasn't changed much in the last 20 years. It's the same boring, safe, and easy radio. The guest comes on, the host asks questions, the guest answers, end the show, right? Not with the Paranormal Code. You actually get entertainment. You actually get information told to you the way it should be told. Very truthful, very direct. I'm your host, Rich Giordano of the Paranormal Code. You can listen to me Monday through Thursday, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 Pacific on the Fringe FM. I hope to see you there.
Hey folks, guess what the number one phrase that Life Change Tea receives by email? You ready? We love this tea. We love this tea. Time after time, week after week, we love this tea. Life Change Tea gives you more energy, a beautiful cleansing, and fulfills its slogan perfectly. The tea that makes you go. So if you want to be on your health game, log on to getthetea.com and order Life Change Super Strength Tea. Packages come in a 1-month supply, and when you brew this stuff, wait until you see the results. Aren't we all about the results? And with a lot of people's health struggling, we can use a little bit of help. Doctors will tell you disease starts in the gut. So log on to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Be our next email saying, I love this tea. I love this tea. Get the tea at getthetea.com. Helping America one tea bag at a time.
Reclaim your active lifestyle with Angioprim. Angioprim is the original liquid oral chelation supplement. Chelation helps remove toxins, heavy metals, and cholesterol in your veins and arteries that can cause blockages. Scientific research proves the active ingredient in Angioprim has superior oral chelation action that helps promote cardiovascular health. Find out more. Go to angioprim.com. Talk to a trained consultant by calling Angioprim toll-free 877-882-7221.
From birth, we have been conditioned to conform to what is normal, conditioned to adhere to authority, and conditioned to repeat what has been told to us as truth. I'm Ryan Gable, and here at the Secret Teachings Radio, I've interviewed hundreds of great guests and done extensive unique research into subjects that span from the paranormal and the occult to health, philosophy, and history. I personally have no affiliations or agenda, except to use objective critical thinking in my analysis of every subject discussed, to empower myself with information and hopefully allow you to do the same. If you want to join me, tune into the Secret Teachings radio broadcast, airing live Monday through Friday from midnight to 3 a.m. U.S. Pacific Standard Time on the Fringe FM. For more information, you can visit our website at www.thesecretteachings.info or email me at rdgable@yahoo.com.
If you have hard water, the lime scale not only leaves white spots, it clogs pipes and breaks down appliances, costing you hundreds of dollars in energy and wear. Eliminate lime scale and other water issues like brown staining and bad odors with HydroCare water products available from Wave Home Solutions. Wave's affordable water systems don't use salts or chemicals. You'll love the way your water tastes, smells, and looks. Satisfaction guaranteed. For more information, go to bestwater123.com. That's bestwater123.com.
You're listening to Lighting the Void Radio.
The truth is out there.
There's something out here.
And so are we. KTOK Digital Broadcasting, The Fringe FM.
Welcome back to Lighting the Void. I'm Joe Roop, and we are live on the Fringe FM. We just got through speaking with David Mathisen from StarMythWorld.com, speaking about astrotheology, which is one of my favorite subjects. I love speaking about the esoteric. I know you love listening and talking about it, and I really liked the way he came on the show and didn't express that he was a guru or someone that is expressing ultimate truth or that he knows all the answers. What he has actually been able to do is put some of these astrotheological myths together with a lot of different cultures, a lot of different stories. And I think what that proves to us on our truth-seeking journey is that that there's more to this. There's more to these texts. There's more to these teachings than we think. A lot of us want to automatically assume it's aliens that came down. Other people might want to assume that it's just a myth only. But the cool part is when we figure out stuff like this, we figure out more answers. We're putting more pieces together. It does let you know that you are more than just your physical body and this physical earth and this physical realm, playing Fortnite and paying the bills or watching your Netflix. There's more to you, that you are definitely a divine being. I can't prove that, but I think with the guests that we've had on, we're starting to understand that. In the third hour here, I've brought on my partner, Eric Markham, because he's kind of a big fan of this stuff too. So I knew he'd love to come on and speak to us. By the way, the phone lines are open. It's 1-800-588-0335. I've got one more book to give away by Wayne McCroy Jr., who wrote The Alchemical Tech Revolution. I already gave two of them away. And just left the post office today and I think I dropped about $60 at the post office. So all of you guys that got something coming, it's on its way. And I apologize to those who have been waiting for a long time. Eric, thank you. I know you're in the lab doing your alchemy stuff, buddy, but I appreciate you joining me on the third hour.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
What did you think about David?
He is one of the most... I think he's one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever heard talk on the subject. He just really, he's
right.
Studied so much and put so much together. He really makes it almost seamless.
You could tell too, like that he had a lot of information. He really he cares about it, and he wants to get it across. And so that's why he wasn't really jumping all around, but he was connecting the dots because there's so many to connect, and you can tell he was like, man, I wish I could stay on track with what I'm trying to say, but you can't put it all in a 2 or 3 hour show, man. You can't. It's profound, this knowledge. I'm telling you, it's the whole reason why I'm doing the show. Besides the, we do aliens and the paranormal in this broadcast, but that's only because I know it's interrelated. You're not going to find me talking about politics too much. I just don't see the point in it. I don't see the benefit of of it at all, to be honest with you. But I will say that the Space Force is on its way, and Patrick Stewart's coming back to do Star Trek, all in the same time frame, I would guess. So that's kind of nifty. The old he ain't the oldest Star Trek guy, but one of the best-known, well-known Star Trek members is coming back to do his thing, to boldly go where no man has gone before, and we're launching our Space Force. Kind of synchronicity there, don't you think?
Yeah, nice that it goes hand in hand. I always liked the idea that when they did the first spinoff, Star Trek The Next Generation, there's William Shatner, the original captain, a wannabe Shakespearean actor who in later years had to wear a hairpiece or did transplants. So what do they do with the Next Generation? They get a bald guy who's a royal, a member of the Royal Shakespeare Society. It's almost like they were slapping Shatner in the face.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm not a big. I guess I'm more of a Star Wars guy than I am a Star Trek guy. But I've seen those two people battle each other crazy, like the Star Trek crowd battle the Star Wars crowd. But I like them both. I think they're incredibly addicting. I don't know why I started talking about Star Trek. You guys also wanted to let you know that I think by next week the archive's going to be up, the commercial-free archive for this show, and what's going to be in that. I don't know I really don't know what to charge. I'm thinking anywhere between $3 to $5. But what also is going to be in that is my dream journal, some of that dreams like I talked about with Mary last night, which is a dream that I never wanted to talk about, but for some reason she just brings that stuff out. And there was a big discussion around that dream. So a lot of those things are going to be in there, some audio books, and I think it'll be worth it because I've had too many people come to me as far as the podcasters go, the people that don't listen to this live, have told me, man, if you would just cut the commercials out, I'd give you a few bucks. And after about 30 people tell me that, I'm like, maybe it's a good idea to do, So we'll try it out and see what happens. If it don't work, we'll try something else. That's what we do here.
It can't hurt to give it a try, yeah.
And then after tonight, Ryan Gable's going to come on. And I kind of want to address that a little bit. I've gotten a couple of messages from people talking about, Ryan really let loose on some people last night. And on the Fringe FM, we have a lot of hosts that believe and talk about a lot of different things. In fact, I would say around 7 p.m. Pacific, or 5 p.m. Pacific, we'll have hosts that are talking about crystal skulls and things of that nature. And then around midnight, you'll hear another host talking about how he might think that that's a bunch of BS. And I think that's what sets us apart. Because I'm not here to get a team of hosts together that all believe the same thing and are looking for the same stuff, and they all don't nobody contradicts anybody, and it's all a big marketing mess, and it has nothing to do with broadcasting and finding out the truth. And no. This is real radio. In fact, I've even had a couple of episodes where I've had two of my hosts I've had to get in a meeting with at one time. I don't really like airing business because, they didn't agree with each other. But in the end, we all are just searching for the same thing. We're trying to find answers to this stuff. Every one of my hosts are trying to find answers to the truth. And some of them actually are gifted, then they just don't know it. They have certain things like Ryan, who comes on after the show. He's extremely, I don't know, what would you say, Eric? He's extremely analytical and with a logical mind. And then there's just a polar opposite of that. Around 5 p.m., 7 p.m., then, you got a lot of hosts that are extremely spiritual in nature, and they go into things that don't make a lot of logical sense, and it's really up to you. It's up to the listener. And I've gotten no negative feedback about it. In fact, a lot of the listeners like the fact that there's such a different variety of beliefs and hosts on the network. So with that being said, I don't want you to think that I'm that way, that I'm telling these hosts to go out and say this about certain people or other radio hosts and things of that nature, because I'm not. But that's not what my show is about. That's not what we're not here to tell you the truth or enlighten you or teach you or open up your mind or make sure that you don't get ripped off. Or I don't think that I'm here to convince anybody to do anything that they don't believe. I'm just here to ask questions. That's what this show's about. It's a question-asking show. And you can call it cheating because I have guests on. Like Rich says, you're a cheater, Joe. You just have guests on, and that's cheating. Well, whatever. I love it. I think it's fun. But I just can't imagine. Like, I got to talk, me and you, we got to talk for another 30 minutes. I can't imagine anybody wants to hear me yap for 30 minutes. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's where I think you sell yourself short. But you've got a good delivery.
Well,
I envy your ability to deliver and keep a stream of dialogue going. I have to pause about every other 2 words. It's like, okay, what am I saying now?
Oh, yeah. Well,
your delivery is so much smoother.
I don't know about all that. It's just I never got into this thinking that I was going to teach anybody anything, or that I had an agenda to where I was going to talk for hours and people are really going to care, what I got to say. In this day and age, it's hard enough to keep someone's attention for 10 minutes. In fact, half of you listening right now are probably about to hit the pause button because you got something else you got to do. And that's just the way it is, so really talking for 2 or 3 hours and thinking that you're going to care what I got to say, I don't see that. But if we get the right people on and ask the right questions, that kind of works for me.
Well, if you get the kind of guests like you just had on, it's easier. Having been on the other side of the microphone, I know when you get a guest that can sustain a thought. The nightmare is that guest who answers in yes, no, maybe, I don't know. The monosyllabic guy, you have to drag the information out of. David was very good in that he has his thoughts organized. And, it's hard to do. It's hard to put the reality of the universe into a 3-hour show. You're trying to put, the infinite into 3 hours.
Yeah, right. Like Dennis is saying, there is no written rule in media where you have to like or agree with any host. I do believe in freedom of speech. That's why Eric and I have this platform, the Fringe FM, because we don't have to depend on YouTube or Facebook or Spot. I mean, we are on those places, but at the end of the day, we'll be here. We've got our own app. We don't really need those things. And let's say, for instance, let me just give you an example. If I was to rant about a certain person, oh, this guy's a crook and he's a ripoff, and I can't believe all these people are paying him this money and yada, yada, yada. The way I look at it is, and this is just me, I don't think that I'm going to change their mind. People are going to believe what they want to believe. People are going to be cult-like when they want to be cult-like. You can't. And in fact, the more you try to counteract this is just my experience, the more you try to get them to open their eyes about certain things, when it comes to that, the more they're just going to give you pushback. And if these people,
you're going to meet resistance. They're going to dig their heels in and resist,
right?
Because if you go about trying to force it on them. I'm that way. If I believe in something, I'll take a contrarian view just because I don't want somebody pushing me into it. I want to arrive there on my own.
Well, see, we've had guests on here who man, there's a lot of distractions going on when it comes to information. There's a lot of stories, but they won't say any names. Well, you got to understand, Ryan is not like that. Ryan's not scared to say anybody's name. He's not scared to say how he feels. But at the same time, let's say, for instance, you know, some of you may have heard him say something about Jimmy Church or whatever. Well, the one thing that I've learned in the esoteric and in the I study in the occult and the esoteric is, and this is going to sound incredibly contradictory, but all truths are half truths. So I can see both points of view, actually. I can see Ryan's point of view very well, but I can also, believe it or not, see Jimmy's. Jimmy is under the entertainment section in this field. Matter of fact, if you go look up his show, the first hashtag it says is entertainment. I think it says it on YouTube as well. He's an entertainer. He entertains these ideas, and people like it. He's successful at it. Ryan has put in years of work and study, and it bothers him that people aren't looking at certain things in certain aspects. I can understand that. So there's a little bit of truth to both, I guess you could say, sides. But I just don't think convincing people to open their eyes is I tried that, Eric. Like, I'm here to open your eyes and help you not be a victim and convince you to be smarter about what's happening. Like, that just doesn't, it never works.
No, it's a rare individual. When it does work, it's almost cult-like. And you can't trust that anyway. Because then, even though it started out with good intent, the message gets lost. It all becomes about the message is gone, but I'm trying to articulate it's like an argument. When you get in an argument, whatever you're trying to get across to that other person, as soon as somebody gets offended, they're not thinking about what you think. They don't care. They're done with you, you know? Right. And they're not going to even comprehend what you're trying to tell them because they're in defense mode. And that's an old Hermetic axiom of polarity. Until we can understand polarity, then we're not going to get past any of this. There are times to be polar. Like, I do have battles I will pick. And Ryan Gable's battle, you got to understand the man has been in radio for a long time now. I don't know if any of you have actually read his books, but he's full of knowledge. A lot of this stuff you hear people talking about on the radio, you know, Thoth and all that, he knows all this stuff. He's wrote about it. He's talked about it. He's been in there. He's been on bigger networks. But when he touches certain subjects, they've gotten rid of him, you know, like pedophilia or some of the bad things that happen and some of the things that he feels like this is what I do need to get polar about. So I'm not trying to tell you never be polar and be in the middle path all the time and never take a side, because that's just stupid too. There are some things you're going to have to stand up for. Well, all my biggest point is Ryan's agenda and my agenda are two different things. But am I going to get rid of Ryan because he's stirring the pot? Absolutely not. I like the fact that he's stirring the pot. Absolutely. Do I think that it's going to affect any of these people? Probably not. I think those people, if they're actually confident about what they're doing and saying, then Ryan possibly could be pissing in the wind. But here's the thing. It's his fight. That's what he wants to do. And I'll back him up. And if you got a problem with that, I don't know what else to tell you. It's just like I've got a polar opposite host. Suzanne Ross is coming on next week, and she's a psychic and a channeler, and goes, and I'm talking about just full of energy. When you just talking to her, you can feel the energy, right? And she's not even into any of that stuff at all. She just wants to get the word out and help people find out who they really are, and it's incredible. Now, those are two conflicting hosts on this network, right? Just two totally conflicting ideas and what's going on, but really there's a lot in common about what they're teaching. But I think that the listeners are going to learn something from both of them. And I know that might sound crazy to some of you guys out there because you think I need to pick a side or whatever, but that ain't going to happen. You know, I think the audience, I think you want to know the truth. I think that's why you're here. I think that's why you listen to the Fringe FM. I think that's why you listen to KGRA, Dark Matter, Dave Schrader,
Heather Wade, George Norrie. I think that's why you're listening to all of these people, because you want answers to the biggest questions in life. Now, some of you are doing it to validate your own beliefs, but that's fine too, I guess. But I think it's fun. Stirring the pot's fun to me a little bit, Eric.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the problems is if you pick a side, your mind is closed, because then you're not open to the possibilities of what the other side has to say. Where if you pick you pick your battles wisely, like you were saying, and you keep an open mind and don't worry about being on a side, you're going to learn so much more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, man, I was hoping David would give me those answers to the Sphinx thing. I call it the riddle of the Sphinx, but it's something that, when I had Xavier Hayes on and he was talking about it was aliens and stuff, I'll entertain that idea, but I really don't believe that the Vision of Ezekiel, and I've argued with Kurt about this till the cows come home, that the Vision of Ezekiel was about aliens. I think it's filled with metaphor that I'm trying to understand. I'm reading Elvis Levi, where he talks about all the aspects of yourself, and he talks about the riddle of the Sphinx and the great secret. But why is it in the sky? That's the real question. Why are these occult teachings in our night sky? And that, to me, there's some kind of a connection there. As above, so below. It's a hermetic connection. You know who Danny Wilton is, Eric? Are you familiar with Danny Wilton?
No, I'm not.
Well, I can't find him. He's disappeared. And if anybody knows where he is, I'd love to get him back on the show. This guy was one of the first people that, he's an analyst, by the way, and he was the guy that was on YouTube that talked about the nebula of Orion. Not the stars, but the nebula. And if you look at the nebula, it has that shape, that chalice shape, right? And so what he did was he would put he analyzed it. He would put graph on the nebula, like graph paper, so he could analyze each section as much as he could. That's what I guess you do as an analyst when you're analyzing a graphic, right? And then he laid it against the Nile River, some of Da Vinci's paintings, and they were an exact match. Not almost a match, but an exact match. Now, why is something in the sky, not the sky, but in our universe, as we see it, an exact match to something that's here on the earth in the form of a river, in the form of a painting? How does that happen? You got that's a pretty profound. They didn't have spaceships or airplanes back then. How did they see this stuff? Why is the Nile River an exact match to it? Right. So this whole as above, so below thing is real. There's something out there that's programming, I guess you could say, programming this place, or vice versa. I don't know if it's programming this place or we're programming it, but when David was talking about how it's not literal, I think in a lot of ways it can be very literal, because Danny Wilton was one of the first people I ever interviewed that showed me a physical form that was in the universe that showed itself here on the earth in crazy ways that don't even make sense. And I've been boggled about that forever. And he was putting out really good stuff, and he's gone. I can't find him on Facebook. I think he was there on Gab, and he tried to steam it. And if you're listening, Danny, I'd love to have you back on the show. I think he got to the point where he just didn't want to explain himself anymore, You ever feel like that, Eric?
Oh, yeah. There's times that I get into a discussion here at work or around other people I know, and there just comes a point where it's like playing chess with a pigeon. Even if you win, the pigeon's going to knock over all the pieces and crap on the board and strut around like it did, with its chest puffed out like it did win. So it becomes futile at times.
Yeah, it's it gets hard to explain sometimes. And I do know that last night, I hope that this is over with. I hope everybody's prodding and poking, and it is over. I'm sure it's going to happen again, but we can all have differences and get along. Does it bother me? I mean, if you want me to actually say what I think, I guess I can. As far as because people are still asking, I'm getting messages about it. As far as the David Wilcock thing goes and Jimmy Church and all that, look, I have faith. Believe it or not, I have faith in this community. I have faith in this paranormal community. Some people don't. I do. And I happen to think that it's you guys, not us, not the host. It's going to be you guys that tell us what the truth is. Eventually everyone's going to go where they're going to go anyways. I mean, if you want to talk about trying to convince people that are cult-like, you can't do it. For instance, the Heaven's Gate people, everybody knows that story, but I don't want to get into that because it's kind of morbid. But what I will say is I'll relate it to attraction. And Eric, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Have you ever met a woman that was attracted to a person they weren't supposed to be? Maybe or a man that was attracted to a woman he wasn't supposed to be. Somebody that was abusive, somebody that lied and it was abusive, and and you'll see where I'm going with this in a minute. That they just didn't need to be around. But what did they do? They made excuses for him. Right? My mom did this with certain men in her life. Well, he's, like, did he hit you? Well, he was just having a bad day, or, he was drunk or whatever, just excuse after excuse, and they go right back to the place where you don't want them to be. You cannot convince somebody that is attracted to what they want to be attracted to, that's validating how they feel and their beliefs and their entire paradigm. You can't convince those people. It's a very sad truth, but you can't. And I think a lot of the times when some of us, and I'm guilty of it too, we go like, I don't understand why all these people are following these, Wilcock and Good, and they just, I don't understand why they're doing this stuff. It doesn't make sense. Like, open your eyes, or some of you are victims and you just don't get it. I think I understand it now. It validates your paradigm, your belief, what you want to think, what you want to feel, and what you want to believe. And who am I to stand in your way? Because I've learned it ain't going to really matter what I do.
And I think everybody's like that to an extent. They go for the information that validates their beliefs. Because, we can be as individuals we want, but face it, it's very rare the person that doesn't want to have anybody agree with them or wants to be so contrarian that they're the only one that thinks like they do. There's always a need, a deep-seated need in the human psyche to have some companionship or some like view. So, these people find niches. Jimmy Church has his niche. Love him or hate him, Alex Jones has, his niche. People that gravitate toward the message that these people are putting out there. And that doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make, who are we to tell these people what needs they are, what of their needs are legitimate? If that's what they have to hear, or that's what they need to rely on to get through the day, hey, it's more power to them.
Didn't I tell you, though, like when they put the thing out about Art Bell and the drugs and all that there were going to be publicity stunts? I put it on Facebook because I knew that, going on the air and talking about how repulsive it would be for a host to do that was just going to be more pissing in the wind, if you will. But that's what happens. It's an opportunity for publicity, and I'm sorry, I don't believe it either. I don't believe Art Bell, his last sign-off was fading to black. I just don't believe that. If you believe that, that's fine. I just don't. And I really, I would really put myself in his family's shoes. I mean, like his kids. He's got a wife and kids. What do you think they think of stuff like that? That's all I was trying to say on Facebook, but It's not going to change anything
medical...
talking about it, though.
Right. And I've got to wonder who allowed that medical examiner to release these results publicly.
They're not supposed to...
anything you do, there's a thing called HIPAA. It was supposed to be a way to carry your insurance from job to job, but it turned into this labyrinthine, 10 billion pages of regulations. But what it boils down to is patient information is not to be divulged. I know people that have lost their jobs just because they mentioned that their aunt had a hysterectomy. We're talking family member to a friend or something, and they've lost their job because it doesn't matter if it's your mom, your brother, you don't divulge patient information.
Well, they did. You're telling me that
and they did.
Art's families they could sue him for that? Is that what you're saying?
Art's family, somebody apparently, if somebody in Art's family did not approve the release of that information, that's a federal, that medical examiner or whoever released those results committed a federal crime.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It's a federal crime if somebody that knew me got into my record and says, oh, hey, did you know Eric had a hernia operation 3 years ago? If I want to say it, that's fine. But if somebody else gets into my record, sees that, and mentions it to another person, and I didn't approve that or say, yeah, it's okay, and in some cases, even that's not enough, you're going to get fined and thrown in jail for that. So I got to wonder who either leaked it or did, Art's family say, yeah, go ahead and, release that. Mm-hmm. And that even if it's true, and I don't know if I totally believe it, but even if it's true, it doesn't matter. Art Bell was pretty much the apex of what we're doing. He was the one that took this art form, this type of, broadcasting, and took it to such a high level, more or less created, he's the one that raised the bar that we're all trying to get to.
I ain't trying to get there, I can tell you that, because it ain't going to happen.
Well,
like this, this show ain't got nothing to do with Art Bell. Nothing.
Well, even if you don't want to be art, not be art, but in the paranormal broadcasting or the fringe broadcasting, he's sort of a benchmark.
I think if I wanted to be like somebody, it'd be like Larry King, actually. I like him better.
Really?
Yeah. Larry King was good, man. Larry King would hit you with a question. Like, he had a way of asking the perfect question at the right time, and a lot of people would try to do the same thing he did, and it would be rude, but not the way he did it. I don't know how he did it like that. He could sit down with somebody for 5 minutes and ask the perfect questions in 5 minutes and be done, and nobody would even get close to it. Even if they interviewed somebody for 2 or 3 hours, would get close to what he got out of that person.
I might have to go back. I don't know can't quite remember what was going on. I don't know if I was in college, and then, I didn't see much of Larry King.
In fact, Larry King was one of Art Bell's mentors. And in reality, if you listen or read Art Bell's book, The Art of Talk, he tells you that when Larry King quit late night radio, that was his opportunity to move in and take over. So it was a timing thing as well, too.
Well, I just remember hearing Art at night. I'd be heading home I had a job that I got off real late, and I would hear this guy talking about this weird crap in the middle of the night. And then once I graduated and started working in night shift at a hospital, Art was on a local FM station that I could pick up inside. this is pre-internet radio days.
Oh yeah, we've had
the
all
net
these.
wasn't even really out. This is around 96, 97, and I just
It's a art reminiscing.
What's this guy talking about?
We got to let the guy go. We got to let him go.
Yeah.
It's time.
That's
the
true.
bell gab is shut down. We got to let him go. And that autopsy thing was just one more opportunity for somebody to make themselves to how like when people die, like when John Anthony West died, everybody was his buddy, right? Everybody knew him and loved him and was their buddy, right? Really, in all truth, there was John Anthony West had a small circle of really good friends, small circle. And it wasn't half the people that were saying that were his buddies. We're all just acquaintances to him. We all looked up to the guy. But it makes you. This is how this works. I mean, in radio and TV and anything, the whole idea is to put yourself in an authoritative image. So you want to put off an image as if you're an authority in that field. So that means you've got to, dress the part, look the part, do TV shows, buddy up with the right people, or at least make people think that you guys are best friends, wear your hair the same way all the time. This is what you have to do. And people like Rich Giordano and Ryan Gable, who've been in this stuff for 9-10 years or whatever, are upset and they're confused and they're pissed off because they're wondering why that these guys over here are getting all the attention when they know they've busted their ass to do this kind of work and that's been there all along. Well, here's the facts. There's a marketing aspect to this thing that you got to do, and if you're not willing to do it, you're not going to get that attention. That's just the way it is. That's just how it goes.
It's been that way for all of human existence. People admire Benjamin Franklin. Let's go off on talk about marketing. He would fill a wheelbarrow full of stuff, like books, bricks, whatever, and would just aimlessly run through town looking Well, that made people think, man, that Ben Franklin is one industrious sucker. You always see him working. It was a marketing ploy. It was image building at its finest.
Yeah, that's all it is. That's all it is. I mean, you can do work till the cows come home, but if you don't, these people have publicists, right? They got teams of people that work for them, really good publicists. Lori, I think we talked to Lori Moriarty the other day when Susan Ross was on. She's a publicist and a really good one. Why do you think Contact in the Desert is one of the biggest events that happen in this field? It's because they've got a good team around them doing this stuff. And, you can't put Contact in the Desert in a box because they've had other people there besides Wilcock and David Good. They've had Robert Schock. They've had a lot of great guests there. So I plan on going there, too, next year, by the way. Joe's saying you got to forgive Joe. He's new to this stuff. He wants to understand what is confusing to him. He needs to look into the history of what? The UFO field? The history of ufology is pretty simple. I'm not confused about that at all. What I am confused about is why everybody's getting angry about stuff they can't do anything about. That's what I'm confused about.
That's true. I agree. Here's the thing. Either the universe is teeming with life, UFOs are real, aliens are here on Earth, or we are the only sentient species and the only life in the universe. I find both to be equally frightening.
Huh, really? The only beings here scares you, huh? Thomas Campbell told me that once, actually. He didn't really say it per se like he totally believed that, but he did, the last time I interviewed him, he did say that, because he has this virtual reality theory, which is different than the Matrix, by the way. It's a little bit different, but, that they were never there. But if you go back to his books, he does mention that he runs into them. So if you want to know why I'm confused, when you get mixed messages, that happens. But he's going to come back on the show. I believe he's doing awesome work. I think he's going to be one of the guys that actually gives us some answers because he's out doing scientific work in this field. He's not just talking science. He's out doing it because he's got an agenda to prove what consciousness really is. And I think that's great. And we're actually going to talk to him again, I think in a few days from now. I can't wait,
awesome.
Man.
Yeah, I can't get enough of that, exploring consciousness. You got me going with the Robert Monroe books, and that's scratching the surface.
That's why I talk about it more than the UFO field, though, Eric. It's not that, I don't believe in aliens or I do or whatever. It's just I've just taken a gander at how all this works, The only thing the government's given us is a couple little videos. Like Joseph was saying, there's a ton of propaganda. There's a ton of marketing going on with it right now. But I don't think we're going to get the answers looking for aliens. I think we're going to get the answers studying consciousness. And a lot of people agree with me. Even, Marla Freese, Whitley Streep. I can count all the people that have been on this show that I've tried to talk to them about UFOs and aliens and stuff. And then where does the conversation always go? Consciousness, astral travel, interdimensional movement, all of the stuff that's happening to more people now than it's ever happened to before, the psychic world. And there are still a few people that are, stuffing themselves full of whatever and are in total denial that this world exists, and they'll probably never get to experience it until they're dead. But there's a lot more people experiencing it now than ever, and I think that whatever's coming, if you want to say something's coming, like aliens or the end of the world or Jesus or something's coming, what's coming is look around, guys. What's coming is an awakening. We're getting closer to that time where people are starting to realize that they are more than their physical bodies. And it's okay. You don't have to be scared of that. I can't believe, man, that you're scared, though. You're scared of both aliens and there not being aliens.
Not really so much scared. It's just, frightening in that, if there are aliens, and I'm in the camp that I believe there's the universe is teeming with life, just the odds are there's got to be some hostile races out there. And I don't want to see our civilization, our race stamped out like Godzilla versus Bambi. There's that apprehension there, kind of like Stephen Hawking said. Maybe we don't want to broadcast our address out there because we don't know who's going to answer. But I actually find the idea that we are the only life in the universe to be truly frightening, because that almost gets into the H.P. Lovecraft, the Lovecraftian idea that we are just insignificant, specters living out lives inside an indifferent universe. That would be horror to me.
I can't take this call, Eric. 910 area code. You're on the air. I can't take this call. No, I don't have time. Hello. Well, that's simple enough. Goodbye. We got to go anyway.
Goodbye.
Hey, thanks for joining me on the third hour, Eric. I really appreciate it, man. It's
thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah. Next week we're gonna do bigger and better things. We're gonna have Dr. Dean Radin is coming on next week. Suzanne Ross. We got a guy coming on to talk about the tarot and how it goes back further than what we think, even back to Egypt and so on. And we're gonna keep doing this thing. We are actually past a full month in on our new nightly schedule, and I'm having a blast. And so I do believe, I haven't gotten any other messages. I do believe Ryan Gable is coming up next. Hold on. Yeah, so he's going to be coming up next on The Secret Teachings. And if you want some pretty good info about all this stuff, you just stay tuned. The program is going to continue on the Fringe FM. And by the way, the show was produced by the Fringe FM. It cannot be rebroadcasted or syndicated without written permission. Music was by Chronox, Bundy. Bundy's awesome, by the way. Space Station, and Kevin MacLeod. We'll see you guys Monday. Have a great weekend. Good night.